Thanks to the existence of magic, this world has spawned many demonic caves. All kinds of demons awoke in these caves, as well as people who possess special abilities. Such people were called the Awakened. At the head of all the demons stood the Demon King Belphegor, the master of the 5 elements. The strongest team of awakened ones, called the Divine Corps, was sent to fight these demons in the caves. For the 10th year in a row, this team was led by the best warrior, Bai Yi. During this long period, the Divine Corps had fought many serious battles. Their mission was to cleanse the demon caves on the orders of a higher authority, whom they called God. And now the Divine Corps team had begun another cave-clearing operation. It was the 100th high-level demonic cave. It contained the most terrifying monsters, but they were opposed by serious players, such as a lightning element assassin named Lin Yue. This mission was designated as an L-Class cleansing operation, and the Cloud Mage Han Shaolin also participated in it. The L-Class was the highest level of difficulty for demon caves. The task was quite difficult, but after its completion, the team was rewarded with a well-deserved vacation. During the battle, Starfall was used, as well as the gravitational pull exerted by the star conductor Lucian. To deal with the demons, it was necessary to strengthen the gravitational pull and increase the power and speed of the attacks. Bai Yi handled this perfectly. After all, he was the commander-in-chief of the Divine Corps and a nuclear saint for a reason. He had perfect control over his abilities and knew how to develop the right strategy for the upcoming battle. Soon, the destruction of the Demon King Belphegor was confirmed. The team had done an excellent job. Lin Wen noted that they had finished the operation too quickly, and she even felt a little sad. She would have liked to find a couple more demon caves to entertain herself. One of the players in a black hood, whose face no one could see, said that it was a first-class mission that required all members of the unit to complete. Still, looking at the defeated demons, it felt like everything had gone too smoothly. Bai Yi said that intelligence claimed it was a special demon king with 5 elements and a hidden skill. At that moment, someone hugged the young man from behind and whispered tender words in his ear. Lin Yue clung to the commander and asked if he would treat everyone before the guys left for vacation, or suggested that they go somewhere together. Bai Yi immediately declared that they would celebrate their victory together, as usual, and do so in the holy capital. The beauty didn't like that the guy sent her away, and Han Shaolin thought that the commander didn't understand women at all. The group was making its way to the cave exit when Bai Yi noticed that one of the guys was missing. He assumed that he had stayed behind to clean up, since he hadn't even fought Benfire, as he was always too slow and preferred to slack off. The players continued on their way home, discussing the battle as they walked, when suddenly a silhouette appeared behind them. The man's hand was raised and the purge operation was activated. Suddenly, the players' bodies were attacked from behind, and they didn't even have time to react. Shaolin lay on the ground with his head smashed in a pool of his own blood, and someone had already begun to carry out the mission entrusted to him by God. Bai Yi tried to reach for his sword, but suddenly realized that his body was completely unresponsive, and he could not move his arms or legs. It turned out that all his breakfasts over the past month had been spiked with a paralyzing powder. Next, the stranger performed a divine skill, the activation of the forbidden vines. To eliminate the strongest of the players, vines were launched, entangling their bodies by their arms and legs. Bai Yi tried to talk to the attacker and find out what had happened. Could he have gone mad since the effect of the forbidden vines deprived him of consciousness and removed all his defenses? The masked man with dreadlocks said it was God's command. The L-Class cleansing operation meant cleansing the players themselves. The forbidden vines continued to squeeze the players' bodies, and soon they began to lose consciousness, unable even to breathe normally. The vines continued to squeeze and twist the players, and it became clear that the situation was critical. Everyone lost consciousness, and only Bai Yi continued to cling desperately to life. The young man tried to figure out why they were being treated this way, and why they were being destroyed, because the Divine Corps had never crossed the line. Bai Yi demanded an answer as to who God was, and by what right they were doing this to the players. The man with dreadlocks called Bai Yi his friend, and said that he was still too naive. Continuing to draw on the forbidden vines, the man declared that it was God's decision. And when God kills, he doesn't need a reason. Bai Yi's body was already starting to bleed. A little more effort and blood gushed out. The vessels could not withstand such compression. With his last ounce of strength, the young man turned to his tormentor, saying that they were comrades and had lived together for 10 years, almost like family. The guy with dreadlocks laughed when he heard this and said that they were not comrades or family. Did the commander still not understand why he had been chosen? The killer said that from the very first meeting, God had been moving these pieces, and they had always been mere pawns. All this was done only to gain their trust. The killer had to play this role for a very long time, so long that he could barely contain himself. He was almost physically sick of this company, but it was just a job, and jobs are not discussed. On May 22nd, 21-25, all participants were confirmed dead, the L-Class cleanup operation was complete, and it was finally time for vacation. That was how Bai Yi's life ended, and the killer with dreadlocks fired a control shot to his head. Some time passed, no one appeared in the cave. The bodies of the slain players lay everywhere, when suddenly the eyes that belonged to Bai Yi came to life. A distant voice addressed the young man and offered him a deal. Bai Yi did not understand where he was or what they wanted from him. The young man was bound by chains on his hands and feet. A stranger in a suit appeared before him and offered to say hello and discuss a possible plan of action. 5 elements swirled around the man, and Bai Yi guessed that he was Belfior, who, as it turned out, was not so easy to kill. Belphegor explained that they were in the realm of his soul, and that the entire kingdom of Nai was his life force. Belphegor did not want to waste time on empty talk and immediately suggested getting down to business. Sensing that the young man's hatred matched his own, Belphegor offered a deal. His hidden skill was called life regression. Belphegor could send the young man into the distant past, giving him a chance to change everything. Bai Yi thought for a moment. The bodies of his slain friends in the face of the hated murderer immediately appeared before his eyes. The young man agreed to accept Belphegor's offer and swore to kill the enemy. In addition, it was necessary to destroy the so-called gods sitting on their thrones. Belphegor was very pleased. As he had expected, the young man gave an affirmative answer, and so the demon prepared another gift for him. Belphegor said it was a welcome bonus and held out a heart. Bai Yi accepted it, but the young man was also interested in the price of this deal. Instead of answering, Belphegor disappeared, and darkness and silence returned. A voice from afar called the young man's name several times, and he struggled to open his eyes. Standing before him was the protector of the holy nation from the Academy of Awakened High School, who looked at the boy with anger and demanded that he get up immediately. Bai stared at the woman with wide eyes and realized that he had indeed returned. The boy looked at his hands and his body as a whole and realized that he was back in time before his awakening. The teacher yelled that sleeping through regular classes was one thing, but sleeping before the awakening ceremony was the height of insolence. She ordered him to stand at the back of the class immediately instead of sitting there with his mouth open. Bai Yi realized that he had returned to his school days. He didn't know whether to be happy or sad about it, because he had truly been reborn. It was incredible, but it seemed that this was how Belphegor's hidden ability worked. Bai Yi looked at his classmates, unable to hide his amazement, because he hadn't seen them in almost 20 years. The teacher continued the lesson and said that there were 5 elemental forces in this world: electrical, plant, cloud, nuclear, and stellar. Each awakened person could possess only one of these forces. For example, the teacher herself had the rather rare cloud element. Depending on how the elements connect with the body, they are divided into 3 categories: combat, support, and special. The combination of elements and roles forms different professions. The strongest guild in the school consists of a star mage, a cloud warrior, a nuclear bard, and a lightning warrior. All the students have already surpassed ordinary people by awakening their potential. Among millions, they were singled out, praised, and nurtured from childhood, and now their moment of glory has arrived. Today was the most important day in the lives of all the students because there are almost 100 known awakened professions. They are divided from lowest to highest: dust, coal, abyss, and heaven. Each student gets only one chance to awaken. And today in the afternoon, the profession of these guys will be determined. The profession will determine a person's future status in this world, and Bai Yi listened very carefully. For him, this day was happening for the second time. The boy wandered around the school grounds feeling a strong sense of nostalgia, because it was here that he had awakened for the first time. Walking through the courtyard, he saw his former friend with glasses, who had fallen right onto the road. The bespectacled boy was being bullied and teased by the older students, who called him useless trash who relied on artificial awakening. One of the guys stepped on the bespectacled boy's hand and told him not to dare block his way and not to think he was cool just because he was about to awaken. The bully declared that for an awakened rare red rank like him, all the other boys would always be insects. It was Hong Chang Sheng. The bespectacled boy offered the bully money and apologized, saying it was his fault. The boy was frightened. Bai Yi knew this school bully. In his past life, he was always getting into fights too. Bai Yi decided that Hong was just playing with his testosterone, since he was always looking for trouble. At that moment, the teacher approached and rebuked the bully, ordering him to stop behaving that way. The woman reminded him that this was a school, not a place for robberies. He replied that the boy had provoked him and that the nerd had allegedly bumped into him. The young man was acting too arrogantly. He waved a wad of cash in front of the teacher's face and said he wanted to treat his friends to bubble tea. In fact, the young man thought that if the teacher had not been so attractive, he would have gotten her fired long ago, and she would not have had to play the heroine. Teacher Huang helped the bespectacled boy up, while the group of bullies went about their business. This time, the teacher had to give in. Passing by Bai Yi, Hong pushed him and said that when they returned, they would definitely laugh at these weaklings again. At that moment, the bespectacled boy tried to apologize to the teacher, saying it was his fault, but she did not believe him. Teacher Huang always appeared strict on the outside, but she was kind on the inside and helped the children a lot after they woke up. At that moment, the students passing by shouted that it was Teacher Huang's class's turn to go to the awakening hall. The teacher reminded the children once again that during awakening, it was necessary to remain completely calm in order to avoid injury. All the children walked one after another, and in this world there were 2 ways of awakening. The first way was natural awakening, as with Hong Cheng Sheng. This usually happened to people with strong bodies and natural gifts. Awakening occurred automatically in moments of strong emotion. The other way was through the awakening hall and was the embodiment of the wisdom of countless scientists. A person was placed in a chamber where emotions and adrenaline were strongly stimulated. As a result of this stimulation, a possible awakening was artificially provoked. Various emotions were stimulated, but each time only one energy was awakened, and a blue coal rank profession could be lost, as is now the case with one of my classmates. Awakening was generally considered the only reset in a person's life, and it determined their entire future destiny. Soon it was Bai Yi's turn to go to the awakening chamber. The teacher advised him to pull himself together and not be lazy anymore, as he had been in class. In his past life, Bai Yi awakened as a Class E nuclear warrior. It was a dusty job, and the young man was constantly bullied because of it. Only in the S-Class did he awaken the rarest type. Now the young man stood inside the chamber, not knowing what he would become this time. He wanted to get the nuclear element again. Time passed, but the result did not appear. The young man was already sweating and extremely anxious. Suddenly, the system announced an error, and the boy's whole body was pierced by a sensation as if he had been struck by an electric current. This heat came from within, and then Bai Yi saw a message saying that 5 elements had been detected at once. The infinite awakening system had been activated. The indicators showed that he possessed all the elements and could now choose any class from these elements as his starting class. Subsequently, when a certain element accumulated enough energy, the young man would be able to obtain a new random class. It was also possible to improve one's initial class by accumulating the element. This was extremely strange. Bai Yi had never heard of anything like it. It turned out that the boy could choose not only the awakened element, but also the class, as well as receive new classes in the future. Over time, the young man will be able to collect classes of dust, twinkle, abyss, and heavenly ranks, and of absolutely all qualities. Only one initial class can be selected, and all subsequent classes will be assigned randomly. Bai remembered Belphegor and realized that with the awakening of all 5 elements, he had gained the ability to awaken infinitely. After choosing the initial class, all elemental scales would be reset, so he had to choose wisely. Bai Yi had been in the awakening hall for quite a long time, and his classmates began to discuss this fact. Finally, the door swung open, and the young man came out. Teacher Huang rushed up to him with a question about who he had awakened as. Bai Yi said that he would have to disappoint his teacher. The young man had awakened a class of nuclear warriors of the worst green quality, but the teacher turned out to be a good person. She tried to cheer the boy up, saying that even among the green quality, there were outstanding people, and Bai Yi should not give up. This world would not abandon him. The boy replied that he didn't need to be comforted, but the teacher understood that he was probably feeling terrible. Teacher Huang sent him home, saying that the awakening had probably exhausted him. At that moment, Hong was in the schoolyard. He laughed at the boy and added that the teacher always said this useless, toxic positivity, trying to calm the weaklings. Hong laughed openly at the boy, saying that he really would have to work hard and that it was no secret to anyone, not even Teacher Huang. Hong continued to mock him, claiming that in reality things were completely different. The quality of the dusty rank meant that Bai Yi was now at the very bottom. But that was the way of the world. The gods themselves chose people, choosing only the strong, while the weak were only needed for humiliation. The teacher tried to calm Hong down, saying that he didn't belong here, but the boy continued his taunts. It turned out that students with dusty quality could now only sit at the back desks. Such was society. If you had no power or connections, you had no future. Always in the background, forgotten by justice. The strong get the best resources and become stronger and stronger. And from the moment the dusty class awakens, their fate is already sealed. Such people can only be low-level laborers among the awakened. After all, what change can you achieve through hard work if you are part of the dusty class? Genius and dust are incompatible, so Bai Yi should not be so naive. Teacher Huang didn't want to hear any of this, but that was the truth. It was as if your fate was already decided from the moment you were born. The Academy of the Awakened reflected this order, and the teacher could not deny it because with her flickering rank, she could only work at the school for pennies. And those students who had been given a low rank were better off going home right away and not wasting the state's resources. At that moment, Bai Yi snatched the glass of tea from Hong's hands and splashed the drink right in his face. Surprised, Hong was speechless for a moment. What was this fool doing? Bai Yi replied that he was tired of the seniors' chatter. This, of course, was enough for Hong to activate his magical power and rush at the student with his fists. Teacher Huang tried to stop the young man as he was already preparing to deliver a star spike blow. This was the Star Killer's basic attack, which significantly increased the power of the blow. However, just as the blow was about to land, Bai Yi blocked it. Then the boy parried the attack, and as a result, Hong received a counterattack and flew far back. Hong flew across the entire schoolyard, scraping the asphalt with his back. It all took only a few seconds, but before the astonished school children's eyes, Hong was defeated. After a while, Hong came to his senses, but couldn't understand what had happened. Bai Yi was standing calmly in the middle of the schoolyard. The students gaped, not understanding how it had happened, how this kid could hit so hard and what was going on in general. Bai Yi held a sword on his shoulder. He was a nuclear warrior with a basic light sword, and declared that he had chosen this class himself. He made this choice consciously because in his past life, he had also been a nuclear warrior. By this time, Hong had already gotten to his feet and declared that the youngster had just been lucky last time. Hong possessed a rare abyss rank, completely different from the rest of the trash, and now he was going to show it. Teacher Huang looked at the boy in surprise. Something incredible had just happened before her eyes, and it couldn't have been a coincidence. The woman understood that the schoolboy had used a first-class movement skill available only to warriors. It was a parrying skill, the ability to block damage at the moment of receiving the strongest blow. If the block is performed in time, the damage is completely nullified, and there is also a chance to reflect it back at the opponent. The teacher who had once taught the woman had not been able to master this technique even after 10 years of persistent training. The teacher looked at the student and couldn't understand how this child on his first day of awakening, with no combat experience, was able to master such a technique. At that moment, Hong had already armed himself with a bayonet and announced that the boy should prepare for death. The bully shouted that he would make the boy crawl in front of him in front of everyone. Bai Yi listened to all this without any emotion. Of course, he had his reasons for choosing the weakest class. Judging a person's future and life based on their birth is a serious mistake that you only realize many years later. Bai Yi wanted to prove to everyone and teach those around him not to jump to conclusions too early. And now in the middle of the schoolyard, it seemed that a fight was inevitable. But the students knew that using awakened powers for duels at school was strictly forbidden. And besides, many people were watching what was happening. Hong Changsheng came from an influential family. His father was a high-ranking official, and his uncle was the dean of the school. Bai Yi's family, on the other hand, was poor and had no connections. The bespectacled boy was worried that if a fight broke out now, Bai Yi would most likely be expelled from school, so he asked the teacher to do something. Teacher Huang was distracted from her thoughts, stood between the boys and asked them to stop, reminding them that they had all just awakened and might become good comrades in battle in the future. However, Hong did not want to hear about backing down. After all, some piece of trash had dared to provoke him in front of everyone. Hong was not going to let it go, even if the boy knelt before him and begged. Bai understood that there was indeed a huge difference between them, but not in origin, but in bonuses and characteristics. Bai had just received his class, and his attribute bonus quality remained unchanged. The teacher activated her radiance, trying to stop the impending fight in any way she could. Of course, Hong's characteristics were much higher. He was a Class E-star killer. At the moment of awakening, the characteristics of the Abyss rank are twice as high as those of the Dusty rank, and this gap in power is considered insurmountable. The bespectacled individual looked at his classmate, realizing that in terms of both strength and origin, Bai Yi would be completely crushed by his opponent. The bespectacled individual sincerely worried about his friend and did not understand why he would provoke someone who was much stronger, even if such people were repulsive. But in order to survive in such a cruel society, one must learn to avoid such scum and dangerous situations. And when you can't avoid them, you have to learn to swallow your pride. Only those who know how to bend and yield can survive in this world, because direct resistance is the most foolish choice. At that moment, Hong finally launched his attack, and Bai Yi knew that the boy was in for even more humiliation. Teacher Huang couldn't stop the fight and shouted at the boy to be careful. She understood that Bai Yi was going to block the blow again, but this skill consumed too much energy. Hong's attack was too powerful and his speed incredible, but Bai Yi didn't even flinch. Hun jumped towards him, raised his arm, and shouted that now the kid definitely wouldn't be able to dodge. Bai Yi smiled childishly and said that he wasn't going to dodge. Bai Yi just smiled in response and said that he wasn't even going to dodge, because he had absolutely no reason to do so. Hong activated all the speed he was capable of, but Bai Yi calmly avoided the attack, passing through his opponent as if he were air. Hong was stunned and didn't understand how this kid had managed to get behind him. In the next moment, the bully felt that he was wounded and blood spurted from his face. Hong fell to the ground, coughing and covering everything around him with his blood, anger and hatred literally shaking his wounded body. He believed that trash, like Bai Yi, belonged in the garbage dump, not in this school, and it was even more incomprehensible how he had managed to get to Hong at all. The students in the courtyard had already begun whispering to each other. No one had noticed what had happened, because the speed was so astonishing that it seemed to the kids that Hong had simply fallen on his own. The bespectacled boy chuckled quietly, enjoying the moment that his tormentor had fallen, while the teacher tried to understand what had happened. But this time, she also did not see how it all happened. But Bai Yi's classmate and the girl with the pink bob who had been watching the quarrel looked very thoughtful, and it was clear that she didn't believe the version about Hong falling. At the moment of the attack, Hong again activated his unique warrior skill, Swiftness, and it was an improved form of swiftness with an instant flash. But what Bai Yi did in response and how he managed to wound his opponent remained a mystery to absolutely everyone. The girl saw how easily Bai Yi won, and that he had not only mastered the highest level of basic warrior skills, but also applied them flawlessly in battle. Less attentive students couldn't understand what was happening to Hong Changsheng today. His opponent didn't even have time to move, and he was just a young kid, so they felt awkward and ashamed for him. Bai Yi remained completely calm on the outside, checking his stats and noticing that fighting with his profession gave him experience, and defeating an enemy of a certain element gave him elemental points. This time he got 50 points, but it was too little. The young man wanted to start clearing the labyrinths as soon as possible. He needed to level up and advance faster than before. Bai chose the nuclear warrior because as he advanced in class, he gained unique characteristics and extremely powerful skills. By this time, Hong had already managed to clear his throat and demanded that his opponent not even think about leaving. Armed with his dagger, Hong prepared to attack the student from behind, determined that this time he would definitely kill him. However, at the last moment, he heard a stern voice saying, "Enough," belonging to the dean of the junior department of the Academy of Awakening, Hong Lian. The dean asked his nephew if he hadn't disgraced himself enough already. The man announced that everyone was probably tired of awakening, so it would be better for the other students to go home because the weekend had arrived and they could relax and enjoy their time off. The dean told the children to tell their families about their awakened professions and to have a wonderful time at home. When the group of onlookers gradually dispersed, Hong Liang turned to Bai Yi and asked if he didn't know that fighting was strictly prohibited at school and how he could have allowed such a thing to happen. Bai Yi was a little shocked by this encounter. Having just been reborn, he hadn't yet realized that he had returned to the past 20 years ago, which meant that everyone was still alive. Bai Yi suddenly remembered that something else had happened on the day of his awakening in his past life, and the young man clutched his head in his hands, wondering how he could have forgotten. Ignoring the cries of the teacher and the dean, Bai Yi ran away at full speed. Hong Liang turned to the teacher and said that she had better keep her student under control. This time, he would pretend that nothing had happened and would not make a scandal out of it. Teacher Huang understood that she could lose her job because of this situation, so she bowed low to the dean and asked for his forgiveness. In the dean's office, his nephew Chang Sheng told his uncle that the guy was just lucky. If that coward hadn't run away, Qian Sheng would have punished him and would never have lost. However, the dean had a completely different opinion. He said that this was complete nonsense, and that his dim-witted nephew didn't even understand what Bai Yi had done to him. The dean understood that the moment Qian Sheng rushed to attack, the boy used a high-level skill, Instant Flash. But more importantly, before he teleported, in that brief moment before Qian Sheng collided with the boy, he found the most vulnerable spot on his body and struck so hard that he completely broke through his defense. This whole series of movements was performed using only the warrior's basic abilities, but even the dean, with all his combat experience, would not have been able to execute it with such precision. The whole fight between the boys looked as ridiculous as if a top-level professional fighter was playing with a child, using only basic controls. At that very moment, Bai Yi was running through the streets of the city, unable to feel his legs. The young man covered a huge distance at maximum speed, thinking that after his rebirth, besides revenge, he had something else to do. Finally, Bai Yi stopped exactly where he thought he needed to be right now. The guy was out of breath and couldn't catch his breath. Looking at the house, he thought that this was exactly the place. Memories flashed through his mind of a boy covered in blood and a man who was very aggressive and strong. Bai Yi knew he had to stop this at any cost, even if it meant giving his life. At that very moment, exactly 20 years ago, a concert was on TV, and a man was sitting on the couch watching the program. It was something very funny, and the man laughed out loud, enjoying what he saw. A woman in an apron was tidying up the kitchen, washing the dishes, when a boy appeared outside the window. Bai Yi had just returned from school, and his parents greeted him, saying that for some reason he had come home earlier than usual today. Bai Yi looked at his mother, tears welling up in his eyes, so happy that she was alive. The woman used sign language to tell her son that she had prepared his favorite meal, spicy noodles. Bai Yi told his mother that today he really wanted pickled fish. The woman, continuing the conversation with gestures, suggested cooking fish for tomorrow, since she had already made noodles today. However, her son insisted, begging her to go with him because he really wanted to eat fish. The loving mother could not refuse her son, so she said she needed to go to the store, and Bai Yi agreed to accompany her. The father called out to the boy and told him not to go with his mother, that she could manage on her own, and that he didn't understand what his problem was, since he had come home from school and hadn't even said hello to his father. The man remembered that today was the day of awakening. The father stood up, blocking his son's path, and demanded that he tell him the good news. Bailin Sheng was an S-Class electric warrior, and he had finished work early today and come home to celebrate with his son. Bai Yi bowed his head to his father and said in a quiet voice that he had not awakened today. The boy said he was unlucky, that the awakening took too long, so all the children were late today. His father didn't understand why the boy had come home so early. He should have stayed at school longer. Besides, one of his father's comrades' sons had awakened as a flickering rank today. Bailin Sheng himself had awakened as an Abyss class, and his son should also be at least an Abyss class. The father believed that he was working himself to the bone to support his son, investing a lot of effort in his upbringing and education. And now the man demanded that his son admit what class he was. Bai Yi continued to insist that he had not yet awakened, while his father's anger and aggression grew with every passing second. Before the boy could finish speaking, his father struck him on the head with a bottle in a rage, breaking it. The man was furious when he learned that his son had awakened in the dust class. How could he be so worthless? Going to school, pretending to be a diligent student, and then awakening as a useless dust class. Bai looked at his father with complete calm, understanding that this angry and aggressive man was his own father who had awakened. But at the same time, this man was very cruel and unable to control his emotions, and now the man's aggression towards his son continued. But these were terrible memories, and so much time had passed that Bai Yi had almost forgotten what had happened on the day of his awakening in his past life. When his father found out that the boy had awakened as a dust class, he was so ashamed that he started a big fight at home. Or rather, not a fight, but a beating of the baby. His mother, as always, tried to protect her child, standing in front of the boy and covering him with her body. Bai Yi was very weak and too scared at the time, while his father picked up a chair and swung it at him. The abuse of his wife continued for an hour until all his rage was spent. That day, his father broke his mother's leg, and a strong blow to the head made her mentally unstable. Bai Yi wept in horror over his mother's body, covered in her blood and unable to help his beloved in any way. And now history was repeating itself. Bai Yi was lying on the floor after his father hit him on the head with a bottle. The difference was that now the boy was not afraid. He lay there and analyzed the situation. Now the young man was only a Class E nuclear warrior. He had chosen this class for its special properties, but he was still too weak. His father demanded that his son get up and not lie on the floor like a weak girl. Bai Sheng was a professional S-Class electric warrior, and of course, he was very strong. Unlike the school bully, his father had a lot of experience in real combat. Bai Yi understood that he would not be able to win the fight now, so he just needed to avoid conflict. But his father was already in the heat of the moment and had no intention of stopping his aggression. He grabbed his son by the hair and began to beat him, saying that his mother should not have been allowed to give birth to such a worthless fool. Bai Yi had returned early today, so that under no circumstances would his mother be allowed to approach his father in such an aggressive state. The boy was happy that he had managed to send his mother to the store to buy fish, and now the woman was out of danger. However, at that very moment, his mother returned from the store with her purchases and found her husband beating her son. Bai Yi did not understand how she had been able to return so quickly. She must have been in a hurry to do the shopping and feed her beloved son. Bai Sheng, still seething with hatred and aggression, noticed a new weak victim in the form of his wife and said that now he would see with her how she could have given birth to such trash. In the city prison, two inmates were talking. One of them asked how the guy had managed to advance from the green rank, since usually the profession must be at least blue rank to move on to the promotion stage. The prisoners wanted to know why his cellmate had advanced so quickly. Not only that, but the guy had gone straight from green rank to the unique platinum rank, which was complete nonsense. It was also interesting why the boy had been arrested and brought here, because only those sentenced to death end up here. The boy couldn't look up. He was very upset and said only that he deserved to die. How could he have beaten his mother to death? And now, having been given a second chance and finding himself back in those terrible days of his life, Bai Yi understood that he had to change history. His father had already started beating his wife. He picked up a chair, preparing to strike the woman, but at the last moment, Bai Yi stepped between his mother and father. An experienced, awakened person, even without using his skills, is much stronger than an ordinary person. And the boy lay in a pool of his own blood on the floor. An ordinary person, in turn, would not have been able to withstand such a blow either. But Bai Yi, although injured, remained basically unharmed. The mother watched her son in horror as a terrible tragedy unfolded before her eyes. The woman could not allow the father to continue abusing the child, so she stood up and tried to shield him with her body. The man said that on the day he found out that Ruyan was pregnant with a son, he was truly happy. He thought that hope had returned to the Bai family, but it turned out that she couldn't give birth to a son, only some weak insect and trash. So the man grabbed a chair and moved towards his family. The Bai family still had to rely on Lin Sheng to restore the glory of their ancestors. But now it turned out that this worthless trash, his son, had awakened with the most useless green rank profession, a nobody who couldn't even get promoted. All because of the useless genes of his stupid wife. The man swung the chair, intending to continue beating his spouse. Bai Yi used a flash of speed and stood in front of his mother, pushing his father into the other corner of the room. Bai Yi held a sword in his hands, shielded his mother with his body, and told his father not to dare touch the woman. This reaction surprised the man and even pleased him. It seemed interesting and a good sign. Despite the wound he had received, it showed that his son had grown up. However, the man was not going to calm down and, in a new fit of aggression and anger, moved towards his loved ones. Bai Yi understood that the fight with his father would take a little longer. First, he had to block him, right at the moment when his father was about to strike. The parry was executed in time, and now there was a chance to reflect physical damage back to the enemy. But his father was too experienced a warrior, and of a higher class. He broke through directly, and soon the boy's sword was broken, and the difference in strength was enormous. Bai Yi felt his ribs ache intensely. It seemed as if they were about to break, and blood flowed from his broken nose and face. Bai Linsheng did not calm down when he saw that the boy was holding his own. His anger only intensified, for his son had dared to disobey his respected father. The man used heavy black lightning accompanied by tremendous speed, and all his attacks had the effect of an electric shock. At that moment, the father was no longer human. He had become a real monster, indiscriminate in his path. Bai Yi knew that there was no way he could dodge it, but he still tried to block the blow or at least minimize the damage. At one point, Bai Linsheng was even surprised that his weak son had a backbone, although he still considered his profession too weak and therefore decided to beat the boy to death. Deflecting his father's attacks, Bai Yi understood only one thing. In this life, he would not allow the tragedy to repeat itself. Once again, his father armed himself with a chair and began shouting that his son was not cool just because he woke up as trash and that the kid had to understand who was the boss in this house. The man raised the chair above the bodies of his loved ones. At that very moment, there was a loud knock on the door, and unfamiliar voices demanded that it be opened immediately. Bai Linsheng was extremely unhappy that someone dared to ruin such a moment. Bai Yi, on the other hand, thought with relief that they had finally arrived. The man went to the door, opened it, and asked who was there and why they were banging so loudly. Two men stood on the threshold, the captains of the inspection and investigators. They asked why it took so long to open the door and what they were doing there. Linsheng was surprised to see the deputy captain at the door of his apartment. The captain replied that they had received a report that a wanted criminal had been seen near this building. That's why they were now going door to door. The captain then showed them a picture of the wanted man and asked if they had seen anyone suspicious. Linsheng relaxed, realizing that they weren't talking about him. He said that he saw this criminal on TV every day and would definitely report it to the authorities if he appeared nearby. At that moment, Bai Linsheng's frightened and beaten wife and son were hiding in the back of the apartment. The inspector noticed the boy, pointed at him, and asked what was wrong with the child. Linsheng put his hand on the inspector's shoulder and said that the silly boy had been careless and fallen while his father was at the store, and that the deputy captain shouldn't worry about such a trifle. But at that moment, Bai Yi loudly and publicly declared that this was not true. His father had beaten him. The man did not expect such betrayal from his weak son. A new wave of anger and hatred flared up in him. Literally 20 minutes before returning home, Bai Yi called from a payphone and told the police that he had seen Snow, whose photos were posted all over the city nearby. The boy knew that the entire police force would be mobilized if they received information about Snow, but he did not expect them to arrive so quickly, even though there was plenty of time. His father began to assure the inspector that the boy was just joking, because he couldn't raise his hand against his own son. It would hurt him too. However, Bai Yi listed that the man had hit him with a stool on the arm, a bottle on the head, as well as with his fists and feet, and all the wounds could be officially recognized as beatings. This information alarmed the inspector, who was well aware of the consequences for those who had awakened, could not control their aggression, and harmed those around them. Strict laws applied. If the offender posed a potential threat, he was subject to immediate arrest and subsequent imprisonment for 15 days. The inspectors immediately drew up all the documents, knowing that they were obliged to respond appropriately. Bai Linsheng looked at his son with incomprehension and asked through clenched teeth if he was completely out of his mind. But at that moment, the inspector announced to the man that he was officially under arrest and had the right to remain silent. Linsheng again couldn't control his aggression and lunged at his son, calling him a little bastard. The inspectors immediately warned that measures would be taken if he resisted arrest. Before the door slammed shut, the father shouted that he would return and get his son. As soon as his father was taken away, Ruyun immediately rushed to her son and began to hug him, while the boy told her that everything would be fine now. This time, Bai Yi was able to protect his mother, and he had 15 days left, exactly how long it would take for his father to be released. The boy calmed his sobbing mother and told her not to worry. This was the last time, and he would have enough time to become stronger. Bai Yi would not allow his father to raise his hand against him again, especially since he had managed to steal the key to the safe. Bai Yi knew that for the sake of the items stored in the safe, his father had betrayed his comrades without hesitation. It was this very thing that had allowed him to rise from the bottom of the E-Class to the S-Class. And now Bai Yi approached the safe. The boy opened the safe with the key, knowing that his father had always kept this thing in his room and hidden it even from his family. In his past life, Bai Yi only learned of the existence of this thing after his father's death. The young man took the blade out of the safe, with which he would be able to clear the demon cave on his own. At that time, only caves allowed one to change classes, but now they were all under the control of God, and only members of the guild were allowed to enter. The only caves accessible to Bai Yi were those controlled by the school, as well as the secret demon caves that the boy had learned about in his previous life. Bai Yi immediately went to one of these secret caves. Its level and difficulty were unknown. The boy understood that he had to become the fastest and surpass everyone else. In the inspection department, in the detention room behind bars, was Bai Linsheng. The police discussed that today the alarm had gone off for the entire security team, but in the end they found nothing. But that wasn't so important, because if rebels were involved, they couldn't relax. Even the head of the inspection had arrived in the city. If it turned out that snow was really in the area on the day of the holiday, it would be a big problem. The inspector asked what they would do when the captain returned, but his colleague interrupted him, saying that such topics should not be discussed here. Lin Sheng took advantage of the situation, banging on the bars and begging the deputy chief inspector to spare him, assuring him that this was the first time he had been in such a situation and that he would never do it again. Lin Sheng said that he had heard that the deputy was about to have a baby and that his friend had opened the best postnatal care center in the area. This information alarmed the deputy. He realized that someone was trying to bribe him, and Bai Lin Sheng had previously been a member of the guild. Now he was a disgrace to all inspectors. How could he have sunk to such a state? The deputy inspector said that if the bribery came to light, it would be more than just an arrest, so it would be better to rest quietly until tomorrow, when the man would be transferred to the prison for the awakened. The inspector slammed the door and suggested that Bai Lin Sheng just lie down and rest. Left alone, Lin Sheng was literally boiling with anger and hatred. He planned to destroy his snotty-nosed son. Bai Riyun slept peacefully in her bed, while her son thought about how he could become stronger as quickly as possible before his father was released from prison. The boy did not go to sleep that night. He understood that the demon caves were the only option to explore in order to increase his strength. Demon caves could appear anywhere. They were a different space parallel to the human world, and the entrance to them was through a door that appeared out of nowhere. Most demon caves were taken under the protection of guilds immediately after their discovery. Demon caves contain many demonic creatures and demonic ore resources. This made demon caves the best place for awakened individuals who wanted to develop their abilities. However, such caves were extremely dangerous and usually required a team to enter after official inspection. In a past life, one such cave was only reported in the news 5 years after its appearance because it was too well hidden. It was only discovered when demons invaded the human world. It was an F-class cave, usually requiring 3 E-class awakened ones. An E-class cave already required a team of 5 people. Judging by current estimates, the cave the guy was trying to get into now had a very high chance of being F-class. It was the lowest level secret demon cave that Bai Yi could enter, and soon the young man found himself right in front of its entrance. Demon caves were full of dangers and usually required the cooperation of various elemental and professional teams to increase the chance of victory. But now the young man had no other choice. He had to become stronger on his own as soon as possible. Thus, Bai Yi entered the cave of unknown danger level alone to clear it and improve his skills. Inside, the entire area was covered with ice and snow. Most likely, it was the territory of cloud-type magical beasts. The young man walked through this icy room. Rocks, snow, and ice towered around him. Soon, he saw the carcass of a huge, monstrous white bear, as well as human skeletons. It became clear that someone had already been here. Bai Yi learned that the sleeping elemental beast belonged to the E-class and was an ice bear. But then someone's huge, powerful paw appeared right next to the guy. The young man managed to dodge the sudden attack. Of course, the chance of encountering E-class demons here was slim. Most likely, the cave had not yet been discovered because most of the monsters were hibernating. At that moment, a huge, bloodthirsty forest snow wolf, an elemental beast of the cloud type, rushed at the guy to attack. It was a massive and extremely powerful animal, and even this single wolf was higher level than Bai Yi. The monstrous wolf lunged at the young man, but he defended himself with the dagger he had previously obtained from his father's safe. The attack was repelled, and in response, Bai Yi counterattacked the wolf at tremendous speed, using his enhancement and acceleration. This time, everything went perfectly, and the bloodthirsty forest snow wolf collapsed dead in the snow. The Class A weapon hidden in the safe could not be bought just like that. It was this weapon that made up for the gap in the young man's combat power, even though the beast had a high degree of protection. And even when striking vulnerable spots, it took several attacks to win. Bai Yi began to miss the days when he was an L-class player. Back then, he could have dealt with such a wolf in a matter of seconds. After studying the statistics, the young man realized that he needed to pass 10 levels to move up to the next class. But at that moment, a loud growl sounded behind him, and soon he saw the silhouettes of 2 more monstrous forest wolves. It turned out that the whole pack had been drawn by the smell of blood, and soon the young man was facing a whole horde of hungry monsters. The smell of blood had attracted their kin, and now one of the wolves, most likely the leader, stepped forward while the others waited. Bai Yi did not know whether the monstrous wolves would attack individually or as a pack. The young man did not wait for the wolves to decide on the order of attack, and using a critical strike, launched a series of attacks on their vulnerable spots, combining evasion and counterattack. Bai Yi struck without stopping, and soon they had an effect. The young man delivered the final blow, after which it became clear that only the king of the wolves remained to be dealt with. By doing so, the young man successfully raised his class to D. However, the young man still lacked physical strength. He had killed only 20 wolves, but he was already exhausted and felt his energy waning. The fact was that the bodies of awakened E-class beings had very low endurance, and the young man had to put his prey in a spatial backpack. Otherwise, he would have to leave many trophies behind. The ground was strewn with magic stones. Most demon caves are monopolized by guilds, so it is extremely difficult for awakened ones to level up alone. The Snow Wolf's diamond was very durable and was used to create weapons from special materials. If Bai Yi wants to get into high-level demon caves, joining the Divine Core Guild team is the only option. Awakening schools are places attached to guilds, created to find talent for their teams. For most students, their main dream is to successfully graduate from school and join one of the guilds. But if you get kicked out of the team, it could mean you'll never be able to advance. The same thing happened to the guy's dad. He got kicked out and stayed in C-Class forever. Going alone was still difficult and slow. Besides, it was terribly cold in the cave. The longer the young man stayed there, the more stamina he spent on keeping his body warm. Bai Yi looked at the number of snow wolves awaiting their fate, and a bold, boyish idea came to him. He ran away as fast as he could. The young man didn't just run, he zigzagged around the area, confusing the wolves and preventing them from attacking. Finally, after running around and warming up, the young man felt it was time to stop. Assessing the situation, Bai Yi realized that the quickest way to do so was to attract a large number of cloud pythons and bloodthirsty forest snow wolves to a single clearing. And then he made a loud explosion. The noise was supposed to attract all the remaining monsters and make them wake up and come closer. Judging by the sounds of growling and the screams of fleeing wolves, it became clear that the young man had achieved his goal. The huge ice bear, awakened by the noise, was a demonic cloud-type beast and attacked all targets indiscriminately in berserk mode. Entering berserk mode, the bear helped the young man deal with the wolves and pythons, tearing them to pieces with its paws. Now the monster attacked absolutely everything that moved. Soon, new victims among the cloud pythons and forest snow wolves were added to the young man's tally, who also finished them off with his dagger. Thus, he worked in tandem with the huge bear, developing a tactic. Bai Yi simply dodged attacks and waited for an opportunity to finish off his opponents. Although E-Class beasts are ferocious, they are mostly brainless and not very powerful. So the bear not only distracted them, but also saved the young man a lot of stamina. However, if Bai Yi wanted to gain experience points, he had to defeat the huge cloud python. At the very least, he had to deliver the final blow to this monster. The young man was doing an excellent job. At one point, a pack of forest wolves gathered around the player. They were very angry and hoped to devour him. The young man felt unwell. Even with the bear's help, he was very tired and his stamina remained low. Therefore, Bai Yi decided to move on to the next phase. The young man clutched the dagger with both hands and prepared himself. He raised his sword, believing that after such destruction, the arena's capacity must be close to its limit. All the monsters were extremely aggressive and were about to attack the player regardless of their turn. But at that moment, Bai Yi stuck his sword into the ground, and now all the monsters and beasts were trapped. During the battle, Bai Yi constantly analyzed the terrain and realized that it was not a frozen lake. The battle took place on an ice bridge suspended between two cliffs, which began to crack underfoot. The bridge collapsed, dragging many monsters with it, most of which perished. Bai Yi had to deal with the rest using his remaining strength and endurance, when suddenly a huge boulder appeared in front of him. This was the fastest way to level up. When one fights against 100, the battle increases all characteristics. As he destroyed wolves and bears, Bai Yi thought about how every demonic cave had a final boss, and now he was getting closer. For an E-Class cave, the boss should be something like a cruel king, and the noise of the battle and the destruction of the bridge should have awakened him. Looking at the huge white bear, the young man thought that it was not the boss and did not understand why the final enemy had not yet appeared. However, he suddenly felt an effect on his body and realized that it was an ice spell. Everything around him was permeated with waves of magic, and even the cave demons felt its effect. Bai Yi realized that the radiation was coming from the final boss, who had not been sleeping all this time, but had been waiting for the perfect moment. And then the monster rushed at the young man, intending to tear him to pieces. However, the young man soon noticed that his pursuers, the bear and the wolves, had frozen and become victims of the ice. The young man realized that he had to run as fast as he could. Otherwise, the ice would affect him too. Unfortunately, this happened. The boy was standing on the ice bridge, which also turned out to be part of the trap, and realized that it was too late to escape. The cave boss was supposed to appear at the end and collect all the rewards, but the lower part of the young man's body was already frozen. He was immobilized. Bai Yi realized that something very powerful was hidden in this low-level cave. And indeed, something powerful soon appeared before the young man. Bai Yi couldn't move, but the monster didn't freeze. It turned out to be an intelligent boss, a cloud-type elemental demon, the master of the Azure Forest. Along with him were the monkey demons of the Azure Forest, huge monsters with clubs in their hands. The huge lord of the Azure Forest looked at the young man with a hungry gaze. He had managed to trick the player and was now enjoying it. The boss had a very high danger level. Soon, the young man found himself completely frozen and immobilized. He understood that his body would soon lose all its heat and death would come. At this time, the cave boss began to approach him, realizing that his victim could not run away or hide. The young man had only one choice left, and before the monkey demons could strike him, he did something. Bai Yi was able to parry. He managed to do it again and also took the chance to reflect all the physical damage back onto his opponent. The young man used all his inner energy to destroy the ice, but this required a tremendous amount of endurance. Bai Yi knew that he would not be able to repeat such a feat again because he needed time to recover in order to cast such a powerful spell. But before that, he had to win. Just then, the huge ice bear, awakened by the noise, also thawed, activated, and came out to meet him. Bai Yi knew that the nuclear element was inherently opposite to the cloud element, and he had to use this information to his advantage. With his current low stamina, it would be extremely difficult to defeat even these two monkeys. And if the same number of bears and snow wolves appeared, the guy's chances would be slim to none. Bai Yi withstood the attack. However, he understood that he needed to do something else because he lacked physical strength. After repelling several more attacks, the young man was barely standing, and at that moment, the monster's attacks continued. The guy barely avoided the attack, managing to jump aside. In addition, the environment was too cold, and the guy's endurance was almost at its limit because he still needed to warm up his body. The final boss looked at his victim, realizing that victory was his, and laughed inwardly at the young man. But then suddenly an icy storm broke out. Bai Yi didn't understand what was happening. He knew that the skill's cooldown time had already passed. In his past life, the young man had repeatedly faced all kinds of difficulties. Through these trials, Bai Yi had trained his perception of opportunities. But now the guy had only two options. The first option was to stay and continue fighting, but the player's endurance was already at its limit. Even if he could withstand all the damage and defeat several high-level beasts, his chances of survival would be zero. The second option was as follows. He could try to escape from the monsters again. Bai Yi ran to the edge of the cliff and jumped. But at the last moment, the ice caught his leg, and the young man was frozen again. The ice rose very quickly up his body, and now Bai Yi looked like a popsicle on a stick. The final boss watched the player with satisfaction. He enjoyed playing with this guy. Soon, the thin bridge connecting Bai Yi to the ground broke, and the young man fell deep into the ravine. At that very moment, there was a knock on the door. The woman thought her son was sleeping late because it was his day off. But when she entered the room, she was disappointed to find that her son was not in bed, and the bed had not even been made. There was a note waiting for her on the bedside table. This seemed suspicious at first because Bai Yi usually warned his mother instead of leaving notes. Ruyan realized that something unusual was happening to her son. The woman felt that after returning home from school, the boy had become a completely different person, and this greatly alarmed his mother. An underground river flowed through the gorge between the rocks, and the remains of the dead demonic beast floated in it. When the ice bridge broke, a huge number of these demons fell through, and now the young man was counting how many demonic monsters he had killed and how many of them had simply died. Falling to the bottom of the gorge from above, Bai Yi remembered that there should be a river at the bottom of the gorge. This gave him hope, and the young man hoped that he would not die after such a serious fall. And that was his second option, which remained his only chance of survival. However, when the boy fell into the water, he had to break the ice around him again, which took up almost all of his stamina. In addition, falling into the river from such a height had damaged his body too badly. Bai Yi hoped that he had not yet reached his limit, and at that moment, when the guy was suffering from severe blood loss, weakness, and hypothermia, a huge dynamic monster appeared on the riverbank. It was the Ice Lord, a demonic beast of the cloud element that took the form of a saber-toothed tiger. Memories flooded his mind when someone raised a glass and said that the young man had returned, but didn't even invite him to drink. It was Lin Yue, who wanted to hug her friend as soon as possible. Lucian asked if they could quietly eat foie gras with rice today. A hooded team member studied a stand with various data and asked Bai Yi to explain it to him and help him understand. His mother was also there and asked the young man if he had a headache. The demon from the cave, the final boss, was also there and wanted something from the guy. Of course, his father was there too, wishing his son to go to hell. Everything around him was covered in blood, and his father's silhouette began to disappear under the blood because the guy had reached his limit. Bai finally woke up from the nightmare and realized that he had no limit and couldn't just die right now. All his regrets, which had just flashed through his mind like a kaleidoscope, were only regrets from his past life. However, now he had to deal with the Ice Lord. Bai Yi grabbed the monster by its huge fangs with his bare hands. The guy didn't have time to get his weapon. Bai Yi was not going to repeat the mistakes of his past life under any circumstances. After all, the young man had already lost everything once. So now he worked manually, like a real dentist who needed to pull out the monster's bad tooth. Bai Yi had already died once and had no intention of repeating it, so he simply tore the Ice Lord apart with his bare hands. Suddenly, the young man felt a great surge of strength and energy. He began to rise, realizing that a real transformation had taken place within him. It is known that only a desperate situation can cause a class increase, and now Bai Yi stood before his opponent completely strong and confident in his abilities. The decision to go through the maze alone, lure the monsters, and then jump off the cliff was still too risky, but it was worth it. Bai Yi was able to earn a large number of points by destroying his opponents. The Ice Lord was furious because his signature and terrifying fangs were broken. Bai Yi thought that he constantly threw himself into hopeless situations. all in order to get rid of the sticky feeling from the past. This terrible feeling of regret that he had failed to save his family and loved ones, these extremely strong emotions triggered a maximum release of adrenaline. And now, thanks to the adrenaline, the process of advancement and enhancement of all the body's capabilities and abilities began. He failed to level up, but he did learn an advanced skill. It wasn't enough to level up, but the guy was able to master the ultimate skill ahead of time. And now he possessed the core of the Holy Swordsman, and it was time to clear out this cave once and for all. Now the young man killed monsters with a single blow and did not waste his strength on repeated attacks. Bai activated Pure Land and cut down several enemies at once with a single movement of his hand. Soon the Ice Lord was also defeated. The young man gained a large number of profession points. In addition, his health was restored and his endurance increased. Now Bai felt quite comfortable. The young man immediately received the title Wanderer of the Ice Fields and also reduced the damage from cold. Bai was going to learn the ultimate skill Sanctuary and then return to deal with the boss. Having reached the 8th level of the E-class, the guy felt that killing monsters of this class had become very easy. In addition, he now hardly felt the cold. Sanctuary can accumulate all damage received and release it at once on a group of enemies. It is activated only after sufficient fatigue and damage have been accumulated. Bai climbed up the rock to reach the final boss and the monkeys. With the help of Sanctuary, the guy's stamina was fully restored. He didn't know how much time he had spent in this cave, but he felt he needed to hurry or his mother would start to worry. Climbing up from the gorge, a gazebo-like house appeared before the boy's eyes. It had no front wall, and someone was sitting deep inside the building. Monkeys were hanging by their tails along the entire length of the gazebo, fast asleep. In the back sat the final boss, who was surprised to see the boy in front of him again. Bai broke into the house with the ice bear he had just defeated. The young man greeted the monster, saying that finally they had met again. At that very moment, Ruyun was literally beside herself with anxiety. The woman was worried about her son, who still hadn't returned. In fact, it was unclear where he was. Bai was almost fine and was known to be in the demonic cave in the final boss's house, which he had almost completely destroyed. Several monkey defenders and the final boss's guards appeared before the young man. Before he could reach the boss, he had to deal with them. Bai was very pleased that he would finally be able to complete this task because he needed to go home. The huge carcass of the slain bear knocked down the monkeys and a few snow wolves as well. One of the monkey guards rushed over the dead bear's body toward the young man to fight him. Bai dealt with the attack with absolute ease, and the demonic monkey was immediately defeated. With a single movement of his hand, Bai ripped its belly in half, leaving it no chance. The final boss watched this battle very closely, realizing that he too would have to join the fight. Finally, when his guards were no longer alive, the final boss attacked the player with his staff. Bai felt the effects of the ice storm on his body again. However, now it did not have the same effect on him as the first time, because the young man already had immunity. Bai activated his cloud element resistance effect, and the damage from the cold was successfully mitigated. After that, the young man himself rushed into the attack. The final boss was still protected by his demonic monkeys, ready to fight to the last. Bai was already tired of this situation. Besides, he wanted to go home as soon as possible, but the young man understood that as soon as he dealt with the boss, he would be able to reach D-class. The guy used lightning flash, and several demonic monkeys were killed instantly. The final boss was left without his staff because his hand, along with the staff, had been cut off and thrown away. The boss was bleeding profusely and still couldn't figure out what to do next. Bai delivered a series of slashing blows to finish off his opponent. Thus, the leader of the Cloud Mages, the King of the Blue Forest, was successfully defeated. Bai received 1,000 experience points. The player was successfully promoted to a Nuclear Class D fighter, and now his current opponents were no match for him. In addition, a huge number of items were waiting to be picked up. Judging by the number of these items, the guy would soon awaken a new profession. Bai was so absorbed in the battle that he completely forgot about this pleasant bonus. And just at that moment, a notification arrived that the new profession had been successfully obtained. It was the profession of Cloud Mage, which could be changed at any time, giving a huge number of bonuses. In addition, its characteristics were almost the same as those of a D-rank warrior. The monsters in the dungeon watched with interest as the player became stronger and more powerful right before their eyes. But since things had turned out this way, it was necessary to test his new abilities on these demons. Bai successfully switched to Cloud Mage mode. After that, the guy pointed his staff at his opponents and decided to try out a new profession that he had never had before. Ruyun was still sitting in the room, waiting for her son to return. The woman was so nervous that she couldn't think of anything good. Suddenly, the apartment door opened slightly, and Bai entered the room. The young man apologized to his mother for keeping her waiting so long. He was holding a bag in his hands. The woman, bursting into tears of joy, rushed to hug her son. Bai said that he had a proposal for her and that he would tell her everything now. Her son suggested moving far away from this place. Using his magic bag, Bai had obtained about a dozen of the most valuable artifacts in addition to his main weapon. He met with the buyer and showed him the magic stones. The man said that next time he would be able to buy them for a good price, but his offer was too low. Bai Yi decided not to sell them to him, saying that he would find another buyer for such valuable cores. Although the guy was young, he knew his stuff. In his past life, he had known many merchants with a knack for magic, so he was sure he could sell these items at a profit. As a result of the sale, the young man got a large sum of money, and with this money he was able to rent excellent housing for himself and his mother. The woman had never had a happy day before, and now she looked at the proposed accommodation with apprehension. Bai Yi wanted his mother to enjoy life this time. Besides, they could now afford a comfortable, modern, large apartment. The deal was closed that same day, and the move took place. The boy had not seen his mother so smiling and happy in a long time as she went about her usual household chores. In the evening, sitting in his new room, Bai Yi summed up his first day in his new home. He had already figured things out, moved up to Class D, and even gotten a new profession. But thoughts of his father never left the boy. The man was still in prison, and he couldn't relax. Bai Yi understood that until the issue with his father was completely resolved, he could not calmly pursue revenge. While thinking about his plans, the young man crafted an item. Soon he made himself a magic stone filled with an element that he could carry with him. This stone increased the effect of magic by 1.5 times. Bai Yi thought about the fact that he would have to go to school the next day, and that it was time to start looking for that very thing. But that would be tomorrow. At that very moment, in another place, a man stepped out of a magical window. His assistants reported that the master's results had improved significantly compared to the previous time. His sister approached him, bringing him a bottle of water and suggesting he take a break. However, the boy threw the bottle away, saying that while there was still time, he needed to go to the next maze for further training. This was Hong Changsheng. He wanted no one to progress faster than himself, and during the test he was going to show everyone who the real genius was. The girl stood by the window, looking at the sleeping city, and at the same time studied the data recorded on a piece of paper. She made sure that there were no golden professions among those who had awakened this year. It seemed that there was nothing to count on in this combat simulation. The first happy and peaceful Monday morning had arrived. Ruyun prepared a delicious breakfast and looked at her son with pleasure. The boy was in a great hurry, shoveling breakfast into his mouth. It turned out that he had overslept and was upset that his mother hadn't woken him up. The woman admitted that she felt sorry to disturb his sweet sleep, but even if he was late, nothing terrible would happen. Bai Yi really did get a good night's sleep because he hadn't had such a peaceful sleep in a long time. Besides, it had been a long time since the young man had eaten breakfast with a light heart. At that moment, his mother asked him about a gift. Bai Yi didn't understand why his mother suddenly wanted to give him a gift, and now she was asking him what books or toys he would like to have. The woman pointed to the calendar, because next Friday was Bai Yi's birthday. Indeed, the young man had been so busy that he had completely forgotten about his birthday, which was coming up soon. It had been a long time since his mother's death, and no one had celebrated his birthday since then. Over time, the young man even forgot about it, and now he couldn't understand what he really wanted because he already had everything he wanted. The only thing the young man wanted was to achieve his next goal, and that goal was very serious. Bai Yi wanted to kill the villain who had destroyed his entire team, including the young man himself, the man in the mask with dreadlocks. At the Academy of the Awakened, it was the first day of training after the awakening and the weekend, when all the guys had rested at home. One of the teachers announced that now they would undergo hellish training for combat simulation. He really wanted none of the students to doubt the importance of the testing. After all, the Academy of the Awakened is a secondary school under the control of the Divine Guild, and the Guild will monitor every step the students take. The combat simulation is the first stage on which the students will perform after their awakening. This battle will be their final assessment upon graduation from secondary school and will be broadcast live. But the most important thing was that the best participant in the simulation would get a chance to join the level up with the high school students. This annual level up was the most direct opportunity to join the Divine Guild. All the students dreamed of this. The school selected the best middle and high school students to go together to Shengi, the headquarters of the Divine Guild. Sheni and the entire headquarters of the Divine Guild brought back painful memories for Bai Yi. It was there that he met the master. It was also the birthplace of that bastard in a mask with dreadlocks, but he and the master never crossed paths. The master joined the squad only after the young man had already become part of the Divine Corps. To find him now, he had to score high on the assessment and get promoted. That was the fastest and surest way. The classmates were very excited about the upcoming combat simulation. It was scary and exciting. They said that the simulation would take place in a demonic cave, and the guys weren't sure they could handle it. The instructor said it was time to start the official training. The first stage was physical training. First, everyone went to the gravity room where they had to do 10 shuttle runs. Some of the guys tried to cheer themselves up and motivate themselves, confident that they could handle this task and do twice as much. Bai said something to the teacher, saying that he didn't want to train in this hall. The teacher was very surprised. He said that he had already heard about Bai Yi's conflict with Hong Changsheng, but that didn't mean that just because the boy had won in the courtyard, he would be able to defeat the red professional without training. Bai Yi said he wanted to undergo more specialized training. The teacher wanted to know what the young man meant. The teacher didn't like that a schoolboy thought his current training method was wrong because physical training is always necessary for everyone. Bai Yi agreed that physical training was necessary, but in his opinion, shuttle running was only suitable for warriors, assassins, and other professions that required speed and coordination. But magicians and spellcasters did not need it. It was better for them to go to the elemental hall and train their control over the elements, because training should be different due to differences in attributes and habits. The teacher was already starting to get angry. It seemed that his student even knew better how to do his job. Shi Yin heard this conversation. She realized that the training method Bai Yi was talking about was the same as that of the instructor from the Divine Core. However, Mr. Dunyan, a teacher from the Divine Core, had only recently proposed this method. The girl had seen a video that her father had brought her, so she also knew about this technique. But how did Bai Yi know about it? At that moment, the bespectacled boy began to whisper that it was better not to argue with the teacher and to consider his feelings, even if the boy had some ideas. After all, the coach was very authoritative, and Bai Yi had begun to openly contradict him. The teacher did not argue or scold him. He said that the training method Bai Yi had suggested was also quite interesting. There are too many students at the school, so it would be very difficult to take into account the characteristics of each one in a short period of time. Simply put, combat simulation is the final performance of all the students at the school. If everything goes wrong, it could ruin a student's life. The teacher has to choose, either decide for the student or let him do it himself. In his past life, although Bai Yi's family was dysfunctional, he was lucky to meet good teachers, thanks to whom he grew up not so lost. The boy asked his teacher to trust him at this graduation and not to let him down. The coach asked him to explain how he planned to train. After all, he had awakened as a nuclear warrior. Bai Yi asked to set the Hall of Elements to maximum element neutralization. His classmates were very surprised when they heard about the concept of the Elemental Hall. Bai Yi said that although he was a warrior, he wanted to balance his abilities and challenge both sides. He couldn't just tell everyone that he wanted to train as a mage. Shi Yin, who happened to overhear the conversation, said that she also wanted to train her control over the elements, since she was a mage. The teacher allowed the students to do as they wished, but asked them not to disgrace him in the final exam. Shi Yin suggested that they train together, as it would be faster that way, but Bai Yi said he would go alone. The bespectacled boy watched his classmates, who had gone to practice magic instead of shuttle running. He also wanted to go with them, because he was the slowest runner. However, the teacher said that he should not be lazy and should go running. Bai Yi was very familiar with the profession of a warrior, but he was still a novice in the profession of a magician. In the near future, the boy had to master it as quickly as possible. Besides, he wanted to hide his trump card and not let others know that he was capable of learning another profession, because the school was under the supervision of the gods, and they knew about his every move. Revealing his secret too early could make Bai Yi a target for these people and prevent him from achieving his goal. Shi Yin had no intention of letting her classmates surpass her in the field of magic. Finally, the long school day came to an end, and all the students went home. Bai Yi was about to ride his bike home when two classmates called out to him. In their past life, they had been his best friends. The boys often spent time together after school. The bespectacled boy asked him not to leave so quickly, as he was feeling quite tired. In the past, they were friends because they were outsiders and were constantly bullied and teased. The boys supported each other as best they could. It was the only happy time in high school. But this time, Bai Yi had a clear goal: revenge. And useless connections only slowed him down. Besides, he didn't want to waste time on the bespectacled boy. Bai Yi rode away on his bike, leaving his former friends alone. The boys didn't understand what had happened to him. After all, they had agreed to always be the strongest, inseparable team. The boys noticed that after waking up, their friend had become stronger and more confident. As sad as it was, the bespectacled boy understood that someone riding a bicycle was unlikely to agree to wait for someone walking. However, when the boys left the school gate, Bai Yi was waiting for them there. Bai Yi turned to the bespectacled boy and told him to have his lungs checked as soon as possible. This sounded too strange and surprised his friends, who had hoped that he was waiting for them to walk home together. However, Bai Yi replied that he would not be going home with them. He had only stopped by to warn his friend to see a doctor. After that, the young man got on his bike and rode away. Bai Yi knew that in high school, the bespectacled boy had suddenly been diagnosed with a lung disease, which caused him to stop attending school and eventually pass away. Even if they were not friends in this life, Bai Yi wanted the boy to be healthy. His friends were sure that Bai Yi had really become cold and had changed a lot. It really annoyed them. But they said that they still felt that their friend was the same as before. The training ground for recruits was called Holy Nation and was located on a beautiful seaside. One of the guys was sunbathing and said he had heard the news about a newcomer who had just joined the Divine Guild and had made a very bright impression. Behind the sunbathing man stood the guy who had broken all the records. The stranger with dreadlocks said that Mr. Dunyan would praise him, and he had just come to introduce himself. Sitting at home during dinner, Bai Yi asked his mother to try not to leave the house alone in the evening. The guy promised to come early and bring all the necessary groceries. His mother agreed to fulfill her son's wish. She reveled in and enjoyed her happy state. Bai Yi thought that this was still not enough. He had to provide his mother with a more stable and secure life as soon as possible. At that very moment, in the prison of the awakened, the prisoners were being sent to dinner. They stood in a line, one behind the other. Each of the men approached the serving window, where food was placed on their plates. During this process, one of the prisoners passed a bribe. That prisoner was Bai Linsheng. The guard confirmed that there was no need to worry and that everything had been taken care of. Tomorrow, the man would be able to leave. The next day, training continued on the school campus. Bai Yi practiced controlling the mage, the main thing being the timing of application and calculation of the element's power. One of the students was also training hard. He was going to finally run the full number of laps today. The bespectacled boy also did not waste any time and diligently did push-ups. Training was in full swing for all the boys. Bai Yi left the magic training hall quite satisfied with his results. The guy was about to go home when suddenly his friends called out to him and suggested having dinner together in the evening. Bai Yi declined. He said he needed to get home early. The young man added that his friend's skill required too much preparation before shooting and that he needed to practice his starting movement. The next day after school, the bespectacled boy went to the school hospital to have his lungs checked. The doctor said that the boy had come just in time. He had a strange parasitic tumor in his lungs. It was growing very quickly, and if it wasn't stopped in time, the doctor advised him to make an appointment at the city hospital for surgery as soon as possible. They would remove the tumor and everything would be fine. The bespectacled man was upset, of course, but said he would definitely make an appointment next week. But he couldn't get Bai Yi out of his head, the one who had advised him to have his lungs checked. Four Eyes didn't understand how his friend even knew about his health problem. Indeed, something strange had happened to Bai Yi. At that moment, some high school students were talking near the hospital. They were discussing how Hong had raised his level again. He did this because he had his own demonic cave at home for training his family army. The bespectacled individual was just leaving the hospital and overheard this conversation. The guys were discussing that Hong Chengsheng was going to teach a lesson to the guy who had humiliated him in the schoolyard last week after school today. Everyone was sure that Hong would never sit idly by and would definitely take revenge for the humiliation. The bespectacled youth realized that this time he had to save his friend. After all, he had brought a weapon with him and would definitely kill that insolent little brat. The bespectacled boy understood that he should not interfere in the affairs of the upperclassmen, but he still had to help Bai Yi, and the young man rushed to his aid. The boy was sure that outside the school, these seniors would bully his friend and possibly call others to join them in tormenting Bai Yi. But gradually, the bespectacled boy's mood deflated. He realized that he was of no use at all. Besides, he was a complete failure and didn't even have any decent fighting skills. Maybe Bai Yi could handle this situation on his own. The young man thought that perhaps he shouldn't go against such serious bullies, but then his gaze fell on the door, which was locked with a padlock. Suddenly, a brilliant idea popped into his head, and he decided to go against his principle of staying away from bad people and do something different. Bai Yi, so to speak, saved his life, so the young man broke the lock and threw open the door. The young man decided that even if he died, he still had to help his friend. There were all kinds of weapons in the room. The bespectacled man chose an axe and was about to go to Bai Yi's aid. He probably would have gone there if Qi Yin hadn't appeared in the doorway at that moment. The girl asked why he had broken into the room with weapons. The bespectacled man replied that he was in a hurry, but the girl was not going to let him go without answering her questions. The guy didn't hold back and said that he had to go and save his friend, Bai Yi. At that very moment, Bai Yi was walking calmly through the city streets. He got off his bike and simply pushed it along, turning into a narrow alley. Without turning around, Bai Yi addressed his pursuer and told him to come out because he had been following the guy all the way from school. Bai Yi immediately noticed he was being followed. Hong Qiansheng came around the corner and said he had come to deal with the guy for what had happened last week. The guy had a weapon in his hands. Bai Yi did not look scared at all. He asked the guy, "Do you really think you can beat me now?" Instead of answering, Hong rushed to attack, using acceleration, and said that he hadn't been sitting around doing nothing all this time. The guy was about to strike him in the back, but his movements were easily read. Bai Yi moved instantly. In that same second, Bai Yi's weapon appeared in his hands. With his next move, he was able to counterattack and cut Han's weapon in half. Qian Sheng felt that the guy's attack power was even higher than his. He didn't understand how this was possible. Bai Yi said that one should not think that only Hong had become stronger over the weekend. The battle ended almost immediately. Bai Yi thrust his weapon near his opponent's face, holding him tightly by the neck. This battle made a very strong impression on Hong. After long training and growth, even though they were the same age, he was facing someone he could never surpass. Qian Sheng did not understand how his opponent had been able to grow so quickly, how he had done it, and what level he was now at. The guy was very angry. He shouted that it was completely impossible because the young man had trained after school and worked hard to become better. He tried very hard. Bai Yi listened to these confessions, then asked the guy, holding a weapon to his throat, "Have you ever died?" Hong was clearly scared, but he tried to hold his ground and said, "Stop talking nonsense. Just kill me or torture me and do whatever you want." Bai Yi still had his opponent by the throat, but he knew he didn't hate him that much. The guy had followed him all this way, but he didn't attack him from behind or call his friends for help. He came alone. Hong just wanted to test his strength against Bai Yi and decided to do it fairly. Qiansheng was very humiliated. He didn't want to listen to this nonsense and demanded that the guy kill him today, otherwise next time he would kill Bai Yi himself. At that very moment, the rescue team had already arrived at the scene. The guy with glasses and an axe and Qi Yin sat behind the trash cans and watched the battle. Seeing what was happening, they realized that there was nothing they could do in this fight. Bai Yi turned to his opponent and said that he had been waiting for him and offered the guy a deal. Bai Yi promised to tell him how to become stronger and faster. But in return, he wanted something from the guy. Finally, the day of the test arrived and the training week was over. All the students were gathered in the training hall. The teacher announced that the combat simulation was about to begin. In addition to the coach, the school dean and teacher Huang were also in the hall. The coach addressed the students, saying that even though it was called a combat simulation, they would be going into a real maze. Most of its power was sealed by a barrier, but there was still danger. There were many monsters in the cave, so they would have to act within their capabilities. For the safety of the students, the school assigned senior students to accompany the younger ones. Usually, these students do not participate in combat, but in case of danger, they intervene or end the simulation. All the students will be divided into teams of 4 to 5 people, where one senior student will lead 3 or 4 students into the dungeon. The students will have to choose between F-class or E-class caves. Of course, the E-class cave is very difficult, and the students are not strong enough to choose it. Failing the test can lead to a loss of academic points, so it is necessary to assess one's abilities in advance and calculate the consequences. After that, everyone began to choose the level of the maze. When the students make their choice, the corresponding teams will be formed. The coach asked those students who wanted to choose the E-class maze to raise their hands. There were very few such daredevils. Among them was Qi Yin. The bespectacled boy and his friend discussed how brave some of their classmates were to challenge the dangerous E-class. But most likely they did not have a green profession. Thus, out of the school's 180 students, only 8 chose the E-class maze. The rest of the students would be randomly assigned to the F-class maze. But at that moment, one of the students interrupted the coach. It was Bai Yi, who said he wanted to challenge his school's D-class Jade Spirit maze. This was unheard of. Everyone was astonished. How could a novice venture into such a dangerous labyrinth? The teacher immediately said that no one would ever jump straight into D-class. It was impossible. But then the school dean, Hong Liang, intervened in the conversation. He said that the D-rank demon cave was too dangerous and that usually only senior students went there. However, Bai Yi replied that the school charter did not say that this cave could not be taken, and the rules of simulated combat allowed you to choose your own level. The boy argued that the school's mission was to seek out talent for the divine core, and that the main standards of talent were courage, strength, responsibility, and giftedness. The boy did not believe that the principal would deprive him of the chance to prove himself and show what he was capable of. Gigan said that school caves could only be entered in teams, but Bai Yi was going to do it alone. The dean knew that the rules were there to protect the students, and solo trips were strictly forbidden. At that moment, Qi Yin raised her hand and said that she also chose the D-class cave. This move by the girl surprised everyone present, even though she was quite talented. The dean did not want to hear about it at all, because he was friends with Qi Yin's father and would not be able to look him in the eye if something happened. However, the girl demanded to receive the highest score. She claimed that she just wanted to test her strength and asked not to be deprived of this opportunity. Bai Yi raised his hand again and demanded that Qi Yin not be allowed to go to the D-class cave. He wanted to go there alone. This was turning into a real scandal. These children had awakened only a week ago and already considered themselves strong. The coach was ready to send the 2 of them to the D-class cave, where it would be just the 2 of them. Most likely, no senior would want to risk going there with them. But then one of the upperclassmen raised his hand and said he would go. The flowers of our nation, the young generation, need protection, and I am ready to protect them. The coach really liked this idea. After all, if Zilin went into the maze, he would be at ease. Qi Yin was surprised. She knew that Zilin had almost made it into the elite school building. Bai Yi was also surprised to learn that Zilin was in the elite school building. The guy had never heard of it. In his previous life, he had never crossed paths with this young man. Xylin looked at the younger student, considering him to be another peacock who didn't know his limits, rushing to spread his feathers in front of everyone without even assessing himself. When all the teams were formed, the coach lined everyone up in front of the goal and announced that the simulation test was about to begin. The coach warned that professional equipment would be constantly monitoring all the students inside the caves, and that the entire test would be recorded. The coach encouraged the students to give it their all. He wished everyone success and a safe return. Finally, the time had come to determine which of the students would score the most points. This time, Bai Yi had to seize this opportunity. The Academy of the Awakened was built on a site once conquered by the Great Demon Cave. Both the senior and junior high schools were located above this cave, and each had its own entrance to the cave. The Great Demon Cave spawned many smaller caves nearby, which are ideal for testing students. These caves vary in difficulty and class, and students practice their professional skills in them. Most caves are controlled at levels F to D. Once the students pass through the entrance to the labyrinth, it means that a simulated battle has begun for them. The boys were very nervous before this test. The entire test will be broadcast live, and every action of the students will be recorded. Bai Yi understood that he needed to be careful and not reveal all his trump cards in the face of unknown threats, as well as in front of the cameras. It was an excellent demonic cave, and it had exactly what Bai Yi needed. The boys cautiously moved deeper inside, looking around carefully. Zilin looked very confident and relaxed. He told the younger students not to worry because he would definitely protect them, especially since he had already been through this cave with others. Qian wanted to know how strong the monsters in the D-Class cave were. Zilin replied that they were approximately between levels 5 and 15. Stronger monsters in school caves are sealed away, so D-Class creatures almost never appear. Not to mention the boss, but still, high-level monsters should not be underestimated. Sometimes their attack power and speed can be overwhelming. After all, the girl had just awakened, and she was very weak compared to these monsters. Zilin promised to find weaker monsters for the girl so she could earn points, but for now she needs to relax because her senior mentor is here and won't let her suffer. At that moment, Bai Yi tried to escape, thinking that his partners were busy talking, but Zilin called out to him, saying that he shouldn't do that. After all, if the guy ran far ahead, he could provoke the monsters. Bai Yi replied that the young man was talking too much. In general, it was better for him to stand quietly and not interfere, because Bai Yi did not need his help. Zilin was very annoyed by this response and behavior. Qian listened with her mouth open and was amazed by Bai Yi's self-confidence. The progress of the group of players was being broadcast via video camera at that moment. This year's simulated battle began to be broadcast throughout the school, and all available students, as well as teachers and other interested people, watched the test. Others also watched the test, noting that it was quite an interesting show. It was likely to be fun. This year, one of the younger students chose the D-Class dungeon. The female captain asked what type this student belonged to. As funny as it sounds, he was the weakest green warrior. I would like to understand where this boy got such confidence. Meanwhile, the bespectacled boy was shaking a tambourine to make as much noise as possible and scare away the monsters. He was in a sealed F-Class demon cave and was also trying to pass his simulated battle. His classmate told the guy that he was just a spell reader. He needed to stand in the back, cast buffs, and stop being so nervous. The bespectacled boy did not understand how an F-Class demon lair could be so frightening. Among the low-level F-Class monsters were a ferocious fang, a star leopard, and several other beasts, but their level was lower than the first. In the sealed E-Class demon lair, things were no longer in order. Some of the students were injured and had to be treated. Hong Chengsheng announced that if his charges couldn't handle it, he would have to deal with these demons himself. The young man rushed to attack the monster because, among other things, he wanted to outrun Bai Yi. In the sealed D-Class lair, everything was going according to plan. Bai Yi was doing an excellent job of dealing with the monsters. He successfully killed the enraged main goat, which was a demonic goat. Bai Yi destroyed the monster fairly quickly without any dangerous situations. Zilin didn't even have time to notice how this kid destroyed Mene. Qian looked at her comrade with admiration. Ahead of them were some strange giant bugs with huge eyes and sharp jaws. Bai Yi said that these monsters were sealed here, so they could only use half of their power. Because of this, they weren't that difficult to deal with. Qian still couldn't calm down. Even with only half his strength, the guy was fighting a whole crowd of demons at once. The girl realized that she was still far from Bai Yi's level, but the young man advised her not to compare herself to others. The guy looked back at the beauty and said that it was better for her to be herself. Qian was literally on cloud 9. She said she would definitely try, clutching the book of magic spells to her chest. Zilin was already starting to get angry and jealous, because this greenhorn had taken all the glory and recognition for himself. He said that he shouldn't get cocky and should remain cautious because this was still a D-Class dungeon. As the senior member, he wanted to give the young students some advice. Qian was sent to the right to defeat the monsters there. Bai Yi said that the maze with 3 caves would be difficult to navigate, so he decided to go to the left flank. Thus the group split up, but most of the cave was sealed with a huge magic lock. Zilin noted that once again, this youngster had ignored him and was not listening to the advice of his elder. Bai Yi told the girl that the monsters on the right were weaker and that she could easily handle them on her own. The simulation battle tested the abilities of each student, and in the end, Qian came to the test. She should try to do something on her own. The girl wanted to get a good result. Qian realized that the young man was trying to cheer her up, and inspired by his confidence, said that she would indeed deal with the demons herself. Qian went to the left, while Bai Yi chose the stronger demons on the right. Zilin was offended that this young upstart was not listening to his advice, so he decided to teach the insolent boy a lesson and took out his bow. The battle was broadcast live, and all viewers could see what was happening in the various demon caves. Bai Yi attracted the most attention, as he single-handedly defeated so many monsters. The teachers tried to figure out his level, but it was only marked as E1. In addition, the teachers noted that the guy was not only capable of destroying monsters, but also of correctly building tactics. He took on the stronger demons himself and sent Qi Yin to the weaker ones. He noticed the elemental vulnerability of his opponents and directed the magical plants to deal with the star monsters. Although this was an individual test, he made the right tactical decision and seemed to have a good understanding of the situation as a whole. The coach remembered how the boy had asked him to believe in him and promised not to let him down on the exam. It was nice to realize that the boy wasn't just bragging, and now it became even more interesting to see what would happen next. Bai immediately noticed that the star monsters were mainly coming from the right cave. These monsters were not only low level, but also vulnerable to the plant element. That's why the young man decided that Qi Yin could handle such monsters. Qi Yin recited magic spells. Her face was filled with fear as a huge giant beetle approached her. But then she was able to summon a wall of vines, and the beetle was stopped by the plants. After that, the beauty added a poison effect and several additional walls. This proved to be enough, and the star beetle was successfully destroyed. Qi Yin was very happy that she had managed to defeat the monster. The girl was happy and began to believe in her own strength. When magicians reach E-class, they receive their main professional skill. Each magician has their own. Qi Yin possessed the ability to create a poisonous wall from plants. This skill allowed her to quickly grow a canvas of vines with poisonous thorns. Considering that it was her first time in the dungeon, her ability to fight high-level monsters alone, and her quick thinking in using the wall to trap the monsters spoke to her outstanding talent. Bai stood in front of the gate and realized that the truly dangerous D-class monsters must be sealed here. Now he was calm, knowing that Qi Yin could handle the demons on her own and didn't need his help. Thanks to this, Bai Yi was even going to hide his true strength during the live broadcast and get a high score. Of course, he had to take into account that the students were accompanied by cameramen everywhere. He just had to figure out how to carry out his plan in such a situation. Zilin was no longer going to help his wards because they completely ignored him. The guy thought that they had become arrogant and did not respect their senior. Since they could rely entirely on themselves, Zilin decided to prepare a surprise for them. The young man took his bow and drew the string, preparing to shoot an arrow at some target. The arrows of light were launched. The young man wanted to see how the children would cope with the complication. One of the arrows flew right past Qi Yin and frightened the girl. Of course, the arrow was not aimed at the schoolgirl, but flew deep into the cave without harming anyone. Zilin said that he just wanted to buff the girl, and she didn't need to dodge. But Qi Yin was frightened by the surprise. However, at that moment, a silhouette appeared from the cave where the arrow had flown, emitting a loud growl. The monster moved very quickly, almost like lightning, and until the last moment, it was not clear what kind of beast it was. It was approaching Qi Yin. It was a two-headed D-class lion. The girl only had time to turn away and try to escape. As she ran, she cast her magic on the monster. However, the two-headed lion easily dealt with the poisonous vines. Qi Yin continued to attack with vines, but soon realized that they were useless in this situation. The huge two-headed lion opened its mouth, preparing to attack Qi Yin. The girl didn't have time to do anything and thought that her end had come. Zilin watched the scene with a satisfied smile, because this was exactly what he wanted to achieve. Now she would definitely ask for help, and the young man would triumphantly save his student. But at that moment, activating his swiftness, which increased his speed and reaction time, Bai Yi rushed at the two-headed lion. The lion had two heads, and while the young man chopped off one head, the other tried to reach Qi Yin. Bai Yi noticed this and instantly used a flash that deflected the two-headed lion's attack. He stood between the monster and his friend, amazed at how the beast could move so fast. Zilin continued to smile predatorily as he watched the events unfold. He knew this dungeon well, as most of the D-class monsters had been sealed away. But there was one caveat: the constantly respawning two-headed maned lion. It was this animal that now stood before the schoolchildren. It didn't care about the players' confidence. They were just newly awakened novices, and now it would be interesting to see how they would deal with a D-class monster. In addition, these demons were now enhanced by the effect of light arrows, which significantly increased their speed. Now it was the fastest two-headed lion. Bai Yi assessed the enemy and unfortunately realized that he would most likely have to use his power. The guy pushed Qi Yin back, saying that she couldn't handle this monster right now. The girl was really scared. At that moment, the two-headed lion went into berserk mode and rushed at the players. It looked truly terrifying. Qi Yin, although unable to defeat the monster herself, decided not to waste time and use the wall of vines again. She built it up layer by layer, and soon it was a triple wall that briefly slowed down the two-headed lion. Bai Yi was genuinely surprised by this turn of events. He turned to his friend and looked intently into her eyes. Qi Yin promised not to be a burden, but asked to be allowed to help in the battle. Although it was a D-class monster, she was ready to fight it. Zilin watched what was happening and couldn't understand. Had the girl gone mad, since she had just been almost eaten by a two-headed lion? Bai Yi also praised his friend, saying that he thought she would be scared, but she quickly pulled herself together. The words of support gave Qi Yin confidence. She said that she had trained hard and couldn't just lose like that. Besides, she felt confident with Bai Yi by her side and knew that she would definitely not die. Bai Yi noted that she had used 3 layers of her skill at once. Her elemental power was limited, so she shouldn't waste it. Bai Yi remembered Qi Yin from his past life. Even then, she had shown in middle school. Once the girl came to school, introduced herself, and said that she dreamed of joining the Divine Guild and becoming a divine officer. She was confident, optimistic, and generous, and she had an influential family, but she remained modest. She was the class president at school and took her responsibilities seriously. After that, their paths diverged, and Qi Yin probably continued to live a normal life. However, now she has become a person who can be trusted. If no accidents happen, she will be able to pass the test while hiding her true power. Zilin believed that these two young men would not be enough to fight the two-headed lion, and that the wall of vines would not last more than a couple of seconds. Real combat cannot be won with confidence alone. With their level of strength, the boys would not be able to cope with the powerful beast. The young man waited for the school children to start begging for mercy and asking him to protect them. And that moment would soon come, because they would have no other choice. Then Zilin would teach these brats what it meant to respect their elders. At that moment, the two-headed lion broke free from the vines. Bai Yi was going to distract the lion, and the girl had to decide when to use the poison element. The comrades scattered and the two-headed lion rushed forward. Bai Yi managed to wound the monster, so the beast chose him as its main target. He ran away from the pursuit at full speed, and the huge demonic two-headed lion ran after him. Bai Yi ran to the riverbank and without hesitation jumped into the water. The monster rushed after him, and the two-headed lion was already swimming underwater. Bai Yi signaled to his partner to activate the wall of vines right in the water, and the monster was caught in the plant nets. The lion tried to break free, but Qi Yin reinforced the wall again and again. Then the girl ordered the plants to tighten, and they gradually pulled the body of the huge monster in. In addition, it was poisoned by poisonous thorns. At that moment, Bai Yi jumped out of the water, and his role as bait worked perfectly. The guy was sure that the monster would not be able to free itself, and all that remained was to complete the test and get the highest score. Zilin was so angry and surprised that he almost exploded. He did not understand how the wall of vines could catch the monster. Even he himself could not have subdued the two-headed lion so easily, especially after it had been strengthened with arrows. It turned out that the poisonous lion could not use its skills in water, while the abilities of the plant element were enhanced there. Using the simplest elementary countermeasures and teamwork, the guys easily subdued the dangerous monster. All the teachers noted Bai Yi's leadership qualities and reaction. None of the teachers had any doubts left. It was clear who would take first place in the simulation. Only the final blow remained. To earn points, they had to finish off the lion. When the recording was sent to the guild for verification, the player would receive the highest score in history. But at that moment, something strange and surprising happened. The live broadcast from the demonic cave was interrupted. The viewers did not understand what had happened, and the drone that had been filming everything was broken and lying on the ground. Xylan deliberately shot the camera, because without video evidence, it was impossible to get the highest score on the exam. Bai Yi praised the girl's abilities, and she said that it was all thanks to him, because she just followed his instructions. Bai Yi said that it was not enough to just train. You had to use one skill with many variations, and the girl did an excellent job with that. Zelen approached the guys and said that they had defeated the boss, so they could leave the pleasantries until after they had finished. The guy was clearly angry. He said he was tired of all this, turned around and walked away. Bai Yi turned to the senior and said that he understood perfectly well that the sudden strengthening of the monster could pose a huge danger to beginners. Zelen continued to insist that he was going to strengthen the girl, and she didn't need to deviate, because then her skills would be useless. Bai Yi said that since the guy was an archer, why couldn't he hit such a large target as the girl? Hua Hin was also angry with her comrade and said that it was no surprise that he was such a klutz, which was why he wasn't accepted into the elite school squad. Zilin tried to justify himself with nonsense that the younger students had told him. However, looking at the guys, he chickened out and said that there was no point in making a fuss. They had a long way to go, and they would see how things really were. And so the kids headed for the cave exit, with an angry and upset Zelen leading the way. Qi Yin was thinking about how much the senior's character annoyed her. But at that moment, Bai Yi crouched down and picked something up. The young man immediately guessed that the senior wanted to prevent them from getting a high score. And now, when no one could see what was happening here, if he left, the guy would need a pass to return. The other groups of students were quite far from this maze, so Bai Yi was happy with the situation. Zilin had done him a favor. Now Bai Yi had a chance to carry out his plan, and Qi Yin didn't understand what her friend was talking about. The kids went back to the passage to the sealed part of the cave, where the scariest and most dangerous monsters of the dungeon were locked up. Bai Yi turned to the girl and asked if she could keep what was about to happen a secret. Although even if she told someone, most likely no one would believe her. Qi Yin stood with her mouth open, not understanding what was going to happen or what secret he was talking about. The day before, when Bai Yi fought with Hong, he made a deal with him. The essence of the deal was to steal one item from the dean. The dean was Hong's uncle and possessed a stone for removing seals. Now it was in the young man's pocket. Bai Yi placed the stone in the right place and said that he was going to take the jade spirit and completely remove the seal. Soon, waves of energy began to emanate from the stone, and the young man watched with surprise and interest. Yin tried to stop her friend because it was impossible to do this. Ahead was a closed D-class labyrinth. If the seal was removed, all the high-level beasts would break out. However, the process had already begun, and the magical forces began to take effect. Bai Yi reassured his classmate, saying that the monster's power was incomplete. It was suppressed by the seal, and there was no need to worry. However, the girl understood that the situation was serious because there were only 2 of them, and it was unclear how they would cope. At that moment, the magical bracelet on Bai Yi's wrist began to glow, and the young man said that they would not have to act alone. Yin already understood what her friend was getting at and said that this should not be done under any circumstances. But Bai Yi had already activated and was standing in the form of a powerful magician. It was hard to believe, but it was true. Bai Yi ordered the girl to stay by the exit and not move. Yin couldn't move. She was too shocked. The seal was broken, and the pack of 2-headed lions, starved from their long confinement, rushed to attack the young man. Yin only had time to shout at him to be careful, but she knew that in this situation it sounded ridiculous. Bai Yi pointed his magic wand at the monsters moving toward him. The boy changed his class to a cloud element mage and activated instant freeze. Yin watched what was happening with great surprise. The boy also had a red profession, and she had barely managed to deal with 1 lion. But now the entire pack of lions was frozen and looked like a huge block of ice. Bai Yi said that these creatures had been sealed for a very long time and would soon break free again. The young man said he needed more space and looked closely at his partner. At that moment, a new group burst out of the cave. Monstrous, ferocious fire leopards. They had also grown bored in the cave and now wanted to attack everyone and everything. However, due to their long confinement, the monsters had weakened at least twice as much, so the young man had almost no trouble. His magic skill was instant freezing, and he used it against the fire leopards. The guy believed that the first thing to do was simply to restrain all the monsters. When that was done, he changed classes again and became a nuclear warrior capable of slaying a fire saber-toothed tiger. The monster was about to attack the player from behind, but the young man was very fast. He instantly changed his class to a cloud element mage and activated freeze again. Yin was amazed not so much by the monsters that kept coming out of the cave, as by how quickly Bai Yi changed classes. Now watching him in battle, she finally understood why the guy needed the elemental room. In this room, he trained to control the elements, because the essence of magic is the release of nature's energy and the control of objects of one's element. Previously, the girl thought that a mage's power depended only on the power of magic and the purity of spellcasting. Now she understood that the power of the elements is born in nature. It is unbridled and must be tamed. Watching her companion, Yin realized how important it was to control power, not just possess it. Only by fully controlling the element can one create many variations of techniques. One skill can be used to create many variations. Bai Yi had already achieved perfection in this action. Soon the polar bears were also frozen. Yin understood that the guy had left everyone far behind, and she respected that fact. Bai Yi was really cool, and now the Lord of the Labyrinth had appeared. The Jade Spirit, the hellish mammoth. It was a monstrous creature. Bai Yi noted with satisfaction that he had finally waited for the one he had been trying to lure out all this time. The young man switched to nuclear warrior mode. Now it was just what he needed. Bai Yi took a defensive position as the hellish mammoth approached him with huge leaps. Bai Yi used a critical strike and jumped onto the mammoth's head in an instant. It didn't have time to do anything. He plunged his sword into its head because even a sealed mammoth of powerful level was now weaker than a monkey. Bai Yi jumped to the ground and blood flooded the hell mammoth's face, blinding the monster. That was enough to deliver a few more critical hits. The hell mammoth fell to the ground. Bai Yi got into the swing of things and wanted to deliver another blow. It was a sanctuary he had recently learned, and now he hoped to make good use of this skill. With this strike, he cut the monster in one motion. In addition to the mammoth, the other frozen monsters also got hit. Bai Yi completely cleared the cave, earning a huge number of points, as well as the Bone of Fury and the King's Fang, which were necessary to create the Inferno Blade. The resonant royal stones lay right on the battlefield. These were special stones created in pairs with a special function. It turned out that it was for this item that the young man wanted to clear the cave. Statistics showed that the young man had already reached Class D among mages. An excellent result. Yin still didn't know how to start the conversation. She was so shocked by what she saw that she just looked at the piles of dead monsters. Bai Yi turned to the girl, reminding her of his request. It was important to the young man that this remain their secret and that she not tell anyone. Yin still couldn't find the words to comment on the situation, but she received a notification that her flower magic had been upgraded to level 7. At that moment, the teachers were going crazy. It turned out that the seal in the tunnel had been removed, and a powerful energy wave was emanating from it. Soon Zilin, who was supposed to be protecting the younger students all this time, came out into the hallway to the teachers. The coach immediately rushed to rescue the children without explaining what was happening, because the seal had been removed and they had to hurry. Zilin realized that the situation was serious and that he would now have to answer for the consequences. The alarmed teachers ran to the children, fearing that they might be found dead. But at the entrance to the cave, Bai Yi and Yin were waiting for them. completely calm and unharmed. They asked the teachers why they had come to the cave, since they were supposed to be supervising the exam. The coach looked, but the seal was still in place, and the cave was completely locked. Most likely the devices had given incorrect data, but that didn't matter anymore. The main thing was that everyone was safe. When classes ended, Zealand walked around the school in high spirits. He approached the deputy headmaster and said that this time he had enough data to get a place in the squad. The latter replied that there was already a candidate for the position, so unfortunately, the young man was out of luck. Zealand couldn't believe his ears. Where did this candidate come from since he had eliminated all his rivals? The boy grabbed the deputy headmaster by the arms and declared that the spot should go to the most valuable player. His abilities and connections should have been enough. The team leader came out into the hallway because of the noise and said that they had already found the right candidate. This person turned out to be a very interesting and promising young man named Bai Yi. Late that evening, a group of men were sitting in a street cafe. An employee of the police investigation department told his interlocutor to stop playing tricks because they had let him go with difficulty. Bai Linsheng ate his noodles and said that he understood the situation perfectly well. The police officer added that they had until next Friday, and the man had to do everything right. At that moment, the police officer's phone rang. He said he was being called back to the station and that Bai Linsheng had better hurry home. Linsheng wanted to get home as soon as possible. Anger and rage were literally bursting out of him. The man came home, but found an empty apartment. His personal belongings had been taken away, and his wife and son were gone. A wave of hatred washed over the father, and he began to smash the furniture. The man immediately realized that his family had hidden from him. He was not going to put up with this, and now wanted even more to see his relatives. Bai Linsheng was going to punish them both. The man began smashing windows in a rage. At that moment, Bai Yi hung a necklace with a stone, a responsive jade, around his mother's neck. The woman had to wear it at all times. Bai Yi showed that he had an identical amulet hanging around his neck. The stone served to send a signal for help. If one of the wearers got into trouble, the other would feel it. Without the stone, Bai Yi could not let his mother go out alone, but now she could go shopping on her own. The woman stood frozen. Her son had never worn necklaces or jewelry. The woman did not have the usual joys that other mothers enjoy, and now Bai Yi wanted to fill that void. His mother wanted her son to spend more time with his friends, but the young man said there was no need for that, and she shouldn't worry. She insisted that he needed friends and loved ones. Bai Yi once had close friends, but now he didn't know if he would ever see them again in this life. Late in the evening, there was unrest again at the entrance to the D-Class Demon Cave. Bai Yi made his way to the Jade Cave again. There was one less thing to worry about there, but an important matter had to be sealed at midnight sharp. Bai Yi was completely focused on pumping up his strength. The cave would be open for an hour and time was running out. Bai Yi, of course, did not forget that in his past life, he was one of the strongest warriors. But now he wanted to fight the wild orchid, a monster that was hiding inside the cave. However, despite his strength, the young man was unable to save his comrades, who died before his eyes. And now he was going to deal with the bloodthirsty orchid, an even stronger monster that lived in this demonic tunnel. The young man quickly and successfully killed the bloodthirsty orchid, cutting it into pieces with his sword. As a result, Bai Yi obtained valuable items, several petals of the bloody flower. The young man continued to fight, realizing that if God wanted to, all the players would disappear without a trace. Bai Yi had to become stronger, and by delivering a critical blow to a vulnerable spot, he successfully destroyed the wild orchid. Dangerous monsters attacked the young man from all sides, but he had to be stronger than everyone else. In the end, all the monsters were destroyed, and Bai Yi received the corpse's stem as a valuable item. The young man understood that he was still too weak, for example, in the situation with his father, so he gave it his all. Bai Yi had failed to cope with his father in his past life, and there was no need to mention the genius who had been a golden archer since childhood. We are talking about a stranger in a mask with dreadlocks who destroyed the entire team. Therefore, there were no shortcuts. The young man had to level up and climb higher and higher in the player rankings, and he couldn't let a single enemy get away, so he planned to spend all his weekdays and weekends in the demon caves for the foreseeable future. Bai Yi destroyed monsters in different ways to develop all his elements and not fall behind in any one of them. Time was passing. The entrance to the lair would close in literally 20 minutes, and he had to get to the lord of this cave as soon as possible. Finally, the entire surrounding area was cleared. Bai Yi reached the very depths of the tunnel when a huge paw appeared above him. Bai Yi assessed the size of his opponent. The lord was gigantic. His body was made of rocky stone, and his power level was very high. Such size did not suggest high speed, so the young man was momentarily confused. In a matter of seconds, the lord was right next to him. Bai Yi managed to react, dodge the attack, and even counterattack, resulting in the monster's arm being severed by his sword and flying away. However, it was not worth relaxing. Green energy appeared in place of the severed arm, restoring the limb. Right before the guy's eyes, the healing skill kicked in, and an even more powerful arm grew back on the monster. Bai Yi was stunned. The enemy's regeneration was so strong that he had to quickly come up with a new plan of action. The Lord, demonstrating his power, struck the cave walls with his new arm and split the mountain slabs with his blow. Bai was gradually damaging the Lord when he suddenly noticed that the bloodthirsty orchids he had recently killed were approaching him from all sides. It was unclear why these monsters had risen again. A D-class Lord should not have had the skill of resurrection. These thoughts distracted Bai, and he weakened his defense. At that moment, the Lord of the demonic cave stabbed him with his paw. The young man did not have time to react. He understood that he needed to take decisive action. But when he looked back, he noticed another Lord behind him, the twin brother of the first monster. It turned out that 2 Lords lived in the cave, and both of them were D-class. Now it became clear why it was so difficult here. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and the entrance and exit to the lair closed. The gates dissolved into space. At that moment, Ru Yong was standing by the huge panoramic window of her new apartment, watching the rain and thinking that she had not heard from her son all day. Although the woman had sent him many messages, she understood that her son had most likely ended up in a dangerous place again and was not answering his phone. The mother decided to go look for him. At that moment, a man who had been drinking and was extremely angry was walking through the streets of the city. Bai Linsheng walked through the streets despite the rain. Anger filled him because the family had dared to rent an apartment and hide from him. The man approached the house where, according to his information, the family now lived. The house was new and expensive. It was clear that they wanted to enjoy life. Just then, Ru Yong came out onto the street. The woman wanted to find her son, and there was anxiety in her eyes. Bai continued his battle with the twins. He was already exhausted, but his opponents were not falling behind, and this was beginning to annoy him. Repeatedly killing the resurrecting monsters gave him neither experience nor items. He needed to find the source of their endless rebirth urgently, otherwise the process would never end. Bai realized that it wasn't just these small orchids that had the ability to reproduce. The young man had already destroyed the Lords several times and dealt them crushing blows. However, they remained alive and recovered, despite being struck in vulnerable places. The Lord was able to instantly recover and heal himself. Bai used his instant dash skill to deliver critical blows, but the wounds were minor and his opponents were very strong. The Lords had the ability to constantly regenerate their health, and they used healing over and over again. Bai tried several different attacks. Even if he cut off the monster's head, it would grow back. It became a mockery. The monster constantly revived and instantly healed its allies. Bai understood that even S-class healers and above would be unable to cope with such an opponent. There was definitely something strengthening these monsters, or a huge source of healing energy. The young man decided to find out and made a sudden dash, taking advantage of the block to attack the enemy again. To his surprise, Bai noticed that the Lords were learning his techniques right in the middle of battle and were now using them against him. The battle continued for some time, until finally one of the Lords said to the young man, "You are truly strong." The fact that the monster could speak and possessed intelligence greatly surprised Bai. At that moment, the young man realized that he had found what he was looking for, the magical flower tree, which was the source of energy. Bai repelled the attack of one of the Lords and dodged another to get closer to the tree. Now he understood why the boss's healing had such a huge area of effect. Bai rushed towards the tree, realizing that he just needed to cut it down, while the Lords tried to stop him in horror, shouting, "No!" The young man was pleased. Now he would be able to destroy the Lords after he finished with the tree. He switched to the cloud element and rushed towards the tree, while the Lords tried to stop him, shouting after him, "Don't do it!" Bai activated the freeze and directed it at the monsters, so they wouldn't interfere with his plan. The freeze worked perfectly, and both twin Lords were frozen in ice. After that, the young man switched to the nuclear element, preparing to destroy his opponents. The frozen and immobilized bodies of the Lords made it clear that as soon as they fell and the tree died, all the other monsters in the cave would lose their healing and resurrection abilities. As a result of killing one of the Lords, the young man received a rare item, the 100 Spirits Herb, which healed most physical damage and increased stamina. Only one enemy remained before Bai, weakened and immobilized by a powerful freeze. The young man stood before the monster with a sword in his hands and declared that he would destroy it once and for all. But the monster did not even try to resist. The Lord rose to his full height and stood before him. Standing before Bai, the Lord offered no resistance and said, "Kill me." Bai saw a Lord like this for the first time. His older brother had died, and apparently the twin did not want to remain in this world alone. The young man decided to fulfill the cave boss's request, rushed into the attack, and destroyed Lord. As a result, he obtained a rare material, a poisonous thorn, necessary for creating a perfect poisoner. Finally, all the monsters in the cave were gone. The young man's stats had increased, he had raised his nuclear warrior class and mage level, and the entrance was open again. Bai had accumulated enough plant element, and soon he would unlock a new profession. He was curious to find out what profession he would get, considering the plant element. The selection was taking place around the young man, and he waited with bated breath for the result. Last time he got the red profession, this time it should be something new and interesting. And so the choice was made. Bai received the blue profession, A little disappointing, since the summoner has low requirements for characteristics, but it was unknown what basic skills it would give him. The flower skill allowed him to make a contract with the soul of a defeated flower monster. An interesting opportunity that could not be missed. Bai Yi immediately remembered the two lords he had just defeated. They were unusual creatures, intelligent and loving each other. The young man returned to the cave and made a contract with the souls of the lords, using them in his new profession, flower summoner. In a few moments, the contract was fully activated. Bai Yi turned to the twin brothers, saying that he liked them very much and would like to work with them in the future. The young man called the lords closer to examine them and explain the essence of the tasks they would have to perform. The summoned lords looked magnificent. One could say they were happy and ready to serve their master faithfully. At that moment, the man was standing in the pouring rain, about to enter the doorway, when the phone rang. He was extremely dissatisfied. Who could be calling at such a time and disrupting his plans? However, he answered and heard that it was an officer calling to confirm that the man would be able to attend Hongdaeji's party. The man turned around and headed in the specified direction, deciding to prepare a luxurious gift. He wasn't going to miss the chance to return to the guild. The man's mood improved. Today really seemed to be a great day. While he had some free time, he hummed a tune with a long knife in his hands and went to visit his beloved. Ruyong was standing in the doorway, about to go out into the street to look for her son, but the pouring rain was holding her back. Bai Yi approached the house and saw his mother coming out to meet him. The young man was surprised. The son hid his mother under an umbrella and suggested they go home. He had a surprise for her. The woman received a bracelet that warned of danger. She really liked the gift. She understood everything perfectly, even without being able to speak, especially when her son did not tell her about the things he did every evening and night. Bai finally made it to his room, lay down on the bed, and began to make plans. He now had 3 professions: Green Warrior, Blue Summoner, and Red Mage. 2 of them had already reached D-Class, but that was still not enough. In his previous life, the boy had been sent to prison on the 21st, and today was already the 10th. His father was due to be released in 5 days, but given his character, it was unlikely to go smoothly. Just in case, Bai Yi prepared a bracelet and paired stones to protect his mother from danger as much as possible. The next morning, despite it being his day off, the young man went to the entrance of the demonic cave. He understood that running away from problems forever was not the answer. Before moving on, he needed to become stronger. By lunchtime that same day, he was back in the new labyrinth, realizing that he couldn't waste a minute and needed to raise his profession level to C-Class as soon as possible. Now he was back at the hidden dungeon, designed for a class with an unknown danger inside. By the evening of the same day, the dungeon had been cleared, and Bai Yi wanted to become stronger than his father before their next meeting. Sunday evening brought unexpected news. The young man received a new title from an important loaner and a hero's key. Bai Yi didn't even know what it was. The next day was Monday morning, and another day of classes was held at the Academy of the Awakened. Teacher Huang announced that the final exam grades would be announced today. Shi Yin and Bai Yi from their class took first and second place in the entire school, and Bai Yi's results were sent to headquarters for careful analysis. The result was recognized as the highest in history, and the winners were granted the right to level up. Thanks to Bai Yi's success, the students also earned the right to an audience with the Divine Guild. This was amazing news. All the students whispered with excitement and envy, because such an honor is not given to everyone, even the most famous players. Bai Yi did not expect such a pleasant surprise. Finally, he would be able to meet them in person. His school friend was moved to tears. He knew that if Bai Yi started to get cocky, he would forget those with whom he had spent his childhood. The bespectacled boy was sure that his friend would shine in the near future. The schoolboy sat pensively in the office, not understanding why the young man did not want to go with the winners. Hong Changsheng continued to refuse, even though his uncle offered to take him to headquarters with the winner under the pretext of joining the level up. The boy persistently refused. He had only taken 3rd place and believed that if he did not deserve it, he was not worthy of going there. Moreover, he did not want others to think that Chang Sheng was dependent on his uncle. The dean was pleased. He said that the boy's father would be happy to see how well his son was growing up. Chang Sheng asked his uncle to help him gain access to the D-Class demon cave behind the mountain. He wanted to become stronger, relying only on his own strength, and planned to train even more. At that time, in the principal's office, Zilin begged to be allowed to go on a level-up quest, as he was the only descendant of the Yang family. The director did not want to agree. If the boy was the only heir, why did he act so ugly and impulsive? If the young man was so concerned about the family's honor, he should explain his behavior during the test. The director accused Zilin of strengthening the monster with an arrow and attacking his comrades. He was really angry. He told the young man that the academy's leadership was not stupid and could see through such pathetic tricks. If the matter had not been hushed up, the boy could have been expelled from school for unethical behavior. Zilin fell to his knees in the middle of the office, began to sob and beg for forgiveness, realizing that he was wrong. Director Yang was extremely angry and demanded that the young man get up immediately. He said that because of Zilin's despicable behavior, the administration had noticed Bai Yi's unique talent. Now they believed that there was something wrong with this boy and would keep an eye on him. This student's progress was illogical, so this time someone from the Divine Guild would meet with him personally. Principal Yang allowed Zilin to go to the meeting, but demanded that he swallow his pride and be very careful. If problems arose again, the principal would not be able to cover for him. Zilin immediately cheered up, stopped crying, and promised that nothing like this would happen again. The young man hoped to have an excellent meeting to raise his level, and Ahile would still become his ally. Later that day, some students received invitations to join an elite club. It was sent personally by Bai Yi and invited him to join the strongest club in the school, which gave him the opportunity to enter the Divine Guild without exams. All the kids were jealous and dreamed of getting such an invitation. The club was the only one that had won a gold medal in recent years. Previously, high school students had gone to great lengths to get in, but now Bai Yi had received an invitation directly, even though he was still in middle school. His classmates thought Bai Yi was incredibly cool and were ready to cry with envy. But then something incredible happened. Bai Yi took the invitation and threw it in the trash. The guys decided that the young man had gone mad and become a complete fool if he refused such an opportunity. One classmate sat enviously by the trash can and stared at the discarded invitation because it was a great opportunity. But there was no point in taking it. It was personalized and the club wanted to see Bai Yi specifically. The bespectacled boy was almost certain that his friend would decline, as he was currently focused on something else. It was already late Monday evening when Bai Yi went to the backyard after school in search of a new dungeon. He arrived at the right place and learned that access to D-class magic marks had been granted. Hong Qinsheng said that no one would come here at night, so he could go in without worry. Bai Yi wanted to go alone, hinting to his new friend that there might be very strong monsters inside and that Hong would be better off starting with something easier. Bai Yi promised to teach the guy combat skills and ways to quickly gain strength in exchange for access to the school's magic seals. The young man did not expect his new friend to immediately gain access to all D-class seals. Hong Qiangsheng really wanted to level up and become stronger. He didn't succeed in everything, but he tried to cope on his own. Bai Yi analyzed his situation and statistics while Hong fought monsters. The young man realized that he would not be able to unlock a new exclusive profession until he met certain conditions. Bai Yi had already killed almost all the monsters in the area, because now school was his only way to level up. The next day, several more invitations to other elite clubs ended up in the trash. And again, after school, the boy fought monsters and trained Hong Qiansheng in exchange for seals. The higher the profession level, the more experience was required to level up after D-class. Progress was much slower, but Bai Yi continued to fight monsters on his own. Hong was angry that his friend had interfered in the middle of the battle, but Bai Yi believed that if he hadn't intervened, his classmate would have lost. On Thursday after school, the guys were doing the same thing in the same place, and finally Hong was able to raise his level to D-class. The boy decided to leave the demon cave. He had reached his desired level, and now he wanted to go through the caves alone. It was more interesting than acting with a bodyguard. Bai Yi was also happy to be left alone. His main profession had reached S-Class, and his overall level had been raised. By this point, the young man already had enough strength to deal with his enraged father in case of a sudden encounter. In the evening at home, his mother tried to strike up a conversation, asking if Bai Yi had a girlfriend. The young man replied that of course he didn't, because he was just a high school student and wasn't interested in that at all. However, his mother was convinced that his late arrivals home were related to either love or friends. She would be happy if her son had someone close to him, because otherwise he might miss his chance and regret it for the rest of his life. Bai Yi had once had a girlfriend who was dear to him. Lin Yue was an L-class assassin in her past life and possessed the element of lightning. The girl showed tenderness towards Captain Bai Yi, trying to pretend that she was not interested in him. There was some chemistry between them, although their relationship remained friendly and professional. Bai Yi did not want to disrupt the team spirit and treated the girl with great care. He refused to carry her in his arms and pretended not to understand her hints, although in reality, he liked her very much. In his past life, the young man met Lin Yue after his teacher rescued him from death row. This meeting took place in the capital, and the young people met completely by chance. Bai Yi decided that the girl was probably somewhere in the city, but in this life, it would be difficult for them to meet again. He only had memories of his past life, and even if they did meet, there would be nothing between them because of the large age difference. The head of the Golden Group was sitting in her room at that time, saddened by what was happening. Bai Yi continued to refuse the invitation to the elite club, which only intrigued the girl even more. She decided to meet with him in person the next day. Lin Yue, an L-class assassin and experienced leader of the school program, would deliver the invitation personally. The next morning coincided with Bai Yi's birthday, and the young man immediately received a gift from his mother. The young man had long since forgotten how to accept gifts and celebrate his birthday. Opening the box, he found a scarf and a greeting card. Bai Yi was surprised. It was summer outside, and his mother had given him a scarf. The boy asked how his mother knew that he was going to Shengye. Ruin replied that the difference in temperature between day and night there was huge, and her son needed to take care of himself. Bai Yi realized that his mother had always understood what he was doing, but she didn't pester him with questions, giving him complete freedom. Before he left for school, She gave him some money, saying that today he should treat his classmates to lunch. After all, he already had friends, he just didn't realize it. That was indeed the case. Bai was too focused on increasing his strength and paid no attention to his social life. On the table stood a figurine of some kind of nymph or mermaid with a magic wand, a mysterious gift. It turned out that his friends had prepared a birthday present for him, his favorite model, which they wanted to give to the birthday boy. The bespectacled man thought that the figurine might seem tasteless, but he personally prepared something interesting. The young man took the case, saying that it was not so easy to get such a thing now. Bai opened the box and saw the original cassette of his favorite movie, The Prestige. In their past life, the friends often secretly went to watch historical films in the barn. The bespectacled man was afraid that the teachers would find the cassette and asked him to hide it close to his heart. The birthday boy really liked the gift. Shi Yin couldn't leave her friend without a birthday greeting. The girl held out the box with her gift and handed it to Bai Yi. Inside was an A-class weapon, a phantom gem, and everyone present widened their eyes in envy. Bai Yi pushed the box away, saying he couldn't accept such an expensive gift. But Shi Yin understood that if it weren't for Bai Yi, she wouldn't have achieved such a high result and wouldn't have received an invitation to level up. It wasn't a particularly valuable item to her, but she knew it was extremely useful to Bai Yi. The young man had to improve himself, so it was not worth refusing. Shi Yin gave him the magic stone, watching as Bai Yi used the highest level mage weapon. The whole situation with the gifts and his birthday touched Bai Yi deeply. He still couldn't believe that his friends had remembered his birthday and prepared for it. At that moment, his friends began whispering about a possible romantic relationship between Bai Yi and Shi Yin, although everyone had their own version of what was happening. Bai Yi wanted to get away from his friends as quickly as possible, but he decided that they were true friends and suggested that they all have dinner together in the evening. The young man said he would treat them, and if his friends had time, they would celebrate his birthday together. The offer was accepted with enthusiasm. In the middle of the day, something unusual happened. Some upperclassmen who weren't supposed to be there came to the school. Among them was Lin Yue, the leader of the elite school team, the captain, who came personally to invite Bai Yi to join their club. It seemed unreal, but it was really happening. The whole school was abuzz with such an honor, but Bai Yi realized that he would have to personally decline in order to avoid receiving new invitations. The whole school was buzzing, and Zilin hated Bai Yi more and more, believing that he did not deserve such attention. Suddenly, energy spread through the school corridors, passing from one light fixture to another, attracting the attention of all the students. Bai Yi was in the hallway when he felt the flow approaching. The boy was right in the path of the impulse, which was supposed to hit him in the chest. Most likely, it looked like an invitation to the Golden League. The wave was very powerful and bright. The flash blinded all the students who tried to dodge, close their eyes, and hide. Bai Yi immediately realized that this was a feint and managed to get out and activate his weapon. The young man held his sword in his hand and prepared to repel the attack. He sensed that the danger was coming from the other side, from the left and behind, and managed to block the blow. Everything happened too quickly for ordinary students. A golden girl suddenly appeared in the corridors. The girl admired the boy's lightning-fast reaction, noting that the captain of the golden team had made the right choice. Bai Yi looked at the beauty and realized that she was his former girlfriend and dear friend, Lin Yue. In his memories, she was cheerful and sincere, always trying to get closer to her unapproachable captain. Now this beauty stood before him alive and unharmed, explaining that she had sent the guy many invitations, but he had not responded, so she decided to come herself. Friends whispered that it would be very awkward if Bai Yi directly refused the captain. The girl greeted Bai Yi and emphasized that it was necessary to introduce herself properly first. But before she could say her name, the young man threw his arms around her neck and hugged her. Bai Yi clung to the girl and said how happy he was to see her again, that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Everyone present, including the captain, was surprised and stared at them in amazement. It could be called the sensation of the century. Young people hugging in front of everyone, and the age difference seemed insignificant. The bespectacled man explained that they were actually the same age. Lin Yue had simply been late for school and had entered high school early. But the surprise continued. It suddenly turned out that Bai Yi was hugging a phantom, holding only air. Lin Yue slipped out of his embrace and quickly found herself behind the guy. The girl asked Bai Yi what his embrace meant. Perhaps it was a sign that he was accepting her invitation. Lin Yue added that the Extreme Alliance School had the best resources in many ways to become stronger, much faster than a regular school, and that they could fight side by side. Bai Yi confirmed that he would join the Limit Alliance, but he wouldn't be staying at this school for long, so joining the school club didn't make sense. He added that he planned to create his own guild in the near future. Then they would have a chance to fight together. The deputy captain noticed the boss and hurried over to her, asking how she ended up here. The guy said that the director had just returned and everyone was told to go and greet him. Lin Yu said goodbye to Bai Yi and told her that they would meet again soon during practice to discuss everything in detail. The girl looked at the strange student, not understanding why he said, "Long time no see." Lin Yue was sure she had never met this boy before. Zilin, who was watching what was happening, was furious. Bai Yi had not only openly refused the head of the Limit Alliance, but also invited her to join his guild. Everyone whispered, trying to understand how it was even possible to create your own guild. It seemed like nonsense. Bai Yi was still a minor, and creating a guild required enormous resources. Anyone could boast about it, but it was difficult to actually do it. The whole school was buzzing like a beehive. Lin Yue was leaving high school, and it was clear that she didn't mind the hugs. Bai Yi watched her leave, thinking that here they were, meeting again, even though he hadn't even hoped for it. In the Divine Guild, personal information is strictly confidential, and players never ask each other about their past. Bai Yi couldn't imagine that Lin Yue would end up at the same school as him. They could have passed each other by and never met, but perhaps it was a gift for his birthday. After school, the friends went to a restaurant to celebrate Bai Yi's birthday. Chiyin asked some exciting questions. Did Bai Yi really want to create a guild? And was it true that he would not be staying at the school for long? Bai Yi confirmed that after leveling up, he planned to stay in the Holy Land. His friends were shocked. The birthday boy was not only going to leave school, but also start his own business. But Bai Yi said that he simply wanted to study in the Holy Land and enroll in the Academy of Divine Warriors. It was a powerful desire and a serious plan. At that time, some very serious and influential people were gathering at one of the city's hotels. An expensive limousine pulled up to the hotel, and Mr. Hong got out, was greeted, and escorted inside. Hong Bin was a master of the Divine Guild, a bright and powerful man with a cigar in his teeth. There were many guests at the hotel, and a police representative was also present with his ward, Bai Lin Sheng. At that time, Lin Sheng should still have been in prison, and the chief wanted to know why the man had been released early. Officer Chen reported that double bail had been paid for this man, and the captain gave his approval. The deputy commander did not understand how this hooligan was able to get into Master Hong's banquet and was extremely dissatisfied. Officer Chen explained that Lin Shen had been expelled from the guild for a minor offense, and now he had a chance to get back in. In order to return to the guild, he brought everything he had, a huge amount of medium energy magic crystals capable of accumulating and releasing magic. Bai Lin Sheng tried to approach the master of the Divine Guild with his stones, but he was rudely turned away, and the stones were scattered on the floor. Hong Bin didn't want anything to do with this loser and asked who had let him in. The building was rented by the Divine Guild, and the intrusion of outsiders meant a leak of information. Bai Lin Sheng knelt down, picking up the scattered stones, apologizing to the master and trying to explain that he just wanted to return to the guild. Hong Bin flew into a rage. This loser dared to try to buy his way in. The master ordered the man to take his things and leave, and the bodyguards literally threw Bai Lin Sheng out onto the street. Enormous rage tore Lin Sheng apart from within. He smashed stones with his fists and was ready to act even more aggressively. Bai Lin Sheng's main problem was his high level of aggression and complete inability to control his emotions. The angry man was ready to attack anyone who dared to look at him. He wandered away, but hatred still boiled inside him. How could this master humiliate him like that? Why didn't anyone appreciate him? Now he would definitely take revenge on everyone. Lin Sheng approached the house where his family lived and told himself that he would kill everyone, including his relatives. At that moment, Ruyun was walking down the street from the store when her greatest fear appeared before her, her husband in his most aggressive state. Meanwhile, dinner continued at the restaurant among friends celebrating Bai Yi's birthday. The young man noticed a group of strangers entering the restaurant, who, judging by their appearance, belonged to the Divine Guild. Bai Yi watched them, while his friends were saddened by the impending farewell, hoping that he would work with the Divine Warriors and even become their leader. The young man felt that today had gone too smoothly, and that wasn't always a good sign. His friends decided not to get distracted by talking about the guild anymore. They were going to celebrate his birthday, and they needed to have fun. Bai Yi raised a glass of juice to his health, but a bad feeling wouldn't leave him. A toast was made, friends clinked glasses, and Bai Yi's amulet rang and glowed on his chest. A frightened Ruyun fell to the ground, and her enraged husband loomed over her, shouting that she had forgotten where her home was. Bai Lin Sheng believed that his wife had found a new husband who was now supporting her and their son. The angry husband clenched his fists, intending to show her her place. His gaze fell on the bracelet on the woman's wrist. The man decided that it was a gift from her new lover and considered it an honor to punish his wife. He believed that she had now forgotten about him, but he would teach her a lesson with his fists. The frightened woman could no longer run away and covered her head with her hands when the bracelet suddenly began to glow. Before her husband's fist reached her, someone's strong hand stopped him, demanding that he stop the violence. Ruyun was shocked, and the two huge conscripted lords swore to die to protect her. The woman remembered that her son had given her the bracelet on Mother's Day. Bai Yi said that Ruyun should always wear the bracelet, especially when they were not together. The lords immediately turned on the man who had tried to harm their mistress. Bai Lin Sheng already understood that a serious battle was coming and tried to resist the twins. The man still felt confident, believing that this would be an easy warm-up, as he had not faced any serious opponents since his expulsion from the guild. On his birthday, as the celebration continued, Bai Yi felt the amulet around his neck begin to vibrate and glow. The young man jumped to his feet and told his friends that he had urgent business to attend to. Bai Yi promised to return soon, but now he needed to leave for a short while, and there was no time for explanations. Once outside, he called Hong Chang-sheng, his former enemy and now comrade, who informed him that the young man's father had been released from prison early. In addition, Bai Lin-sheng had shown up uninvited at Hong Bin's reception today, but had been kicked out. After that, no one knew where he had gone. Bai Yi immediately sensed that something was wrong. The young man tried to contact his mother, but no one answered. She had probably left her phone at home. Bai Yi knew that the hotel was near their new apartment, and if his father met his mother there, it could end very badly for her. Bai Yi jumped on his bike and raced home at full speed, hoping to make it before it was too late. He tried to calm himself, knowing that he had taken precautions. The Flower Lords were left behind to protect his mother. At that moment, Bai Lin-sheng felt confident. He had managed to defeat one of the lords. The man had injured the lord and said dismissively that it was a low-level creature and posed no threat. The lord continued to protect the woman with his body, ready to fight to the end. The wounded lord grabbed Lin-sheng's leg, trying to stop him and give the woman a chance to escape. Lin-sheng felt no fear. He felt his strength and decided to finish off the lord who was holding his leg. Without any pity, the man stabbed the Flower Lord with a knife because his goal was clear: to destroy everyone. Pulling out the knife, Lin-sheng turned to his wife and said that now it was her turn. The Twin Lord continued to cover Ruyan, while the killer approached with a dagger. The Flower Lord did not wait and rushed into the attack himself, ordering his wife to run away and not look back. Ruyan was paralyzed with horror as she watched her husband's cruelty. The Lord attacked his opponent head-on, trying to delay him as long as possible so that the woman could escape. For Lin-sheng, the battle was easy. His hatred increased his strength, and soon the Lord was almost defeated, remaining loyal to his mistress until the end. The man noticed Ruyan's attempt to escape and attacked his opponent with renewed fury. But his strength was immense. He was awakened, much stronger and faster than a normal human. He caught up with his wife and stood in front of her. Standing in front of the terrified Ruyan, Lin-sheng tore the pendant from her chest. The man realized that it was a jade pendant, a gift from her lover, similar to the bracelet. His hatred reached its peak, and Lin-sheng crushed the pendant in his fist. It was obvious that his wife would be his next victim, and Lin-sheng raised his dagger above her. Bai Yi appeared in time, grabbed his father's arm, and prevented him from harming his mother. He promised that he would always be there to protect her. Lin-sheng looked at his son in surprise, not expecting the weakling to be in such good shape. Bai Yi, holding his father's hand with the dagger, said, "Enough!" Memories from his past life flooded back. A frightened boy begged his father to stop hitting his mother, but the man did not listen and continued to beat the woman. Lin-sheng struck again, taking out his anger on his family, while Bai Yi was too weak to do anything. Last time, all he could do was cry and beg his father not to hurt his mother. This happened on a school holiday when his mother took her son to an amusement park, forgetting to warn his father. That day, everything had gone wrong for the man at work, and when he returned, he took his anger out on his family. The beast inside the man broke free, and he almost killed his mother. The boy witnessed this, and the shock caused him to awaken. He reached a new level. Bai Yi's profession changed to that of a golden holy warrior. Then he lost control, took the chain his father usually used to punish him, and turned it against him. With this chain, he killed his father without a shred of remorse. But it was impossible to bring his mother back, and it was all too late. In this life, Bai Yi would not allow such tragedies to happen again. He was sure that he would not be too late and would do everything in time. At that moment, he broke his father's sword with his bare hands. Bai Lin-sheng saw the remains of his weapon. A new wave of anger and aggression rose in Lin-sheng. He did not expect his own son to be his enemy. But now the man decided to kill both of them, the mother and son who deserved it. Bai Yi was ready, drew his weapon, and calmly awaited his father's attacks. Before Lin-sheng could think of anything, his son delivered several precise blows. The man flew several meters and lay on the asphalt, coughing up blood. He barely regained consciousness, but noticed that his son was holding his Hongwu dagger, stolen from the safe. Ruyan, although worried about her son, already looked calmer as she watched what was happening. The Flower Lords began to recover and heal their wounds. Bai Yi ordered the Twin Lords to take care of their mother and take her to a safe place. Lin-sheng realized that these creatures had been summoned by his son, which piqued his interest. He realized that Bai Yi was unique, a dual elemental, a nuclear warrior, and a flower summoner. The man was proud of his son. Such talent at such a young age was rare. The father approached, reasoning that talent could be inherited, but the boy did not ask for permission and opened the safe. At the same time, it should not be forgotten that all this happened because of his son, who acted decisively and without delay. Lin-sheng was not going to turn a blind eye to this, and did not want to forgive his talented son. Now this brat had become a double professional, decided that he was grown up and strong, and dared to disobey his father. The man spewed anger and aggression, and suddenly it seemed as if he had dissolved into space. Bai Yi instantly changed his profession and became a cloud mage. He activated the freeze, and the entire space, previously shrouded in red mist, turned into solid ice. Lin-sheng did not understand where the ice came from, and was stunned. His body was completely frozen, only his head peeking out of the ice. Bai Yi calmly approached his father and said that he was mistaken. He did not have a dual profession. The young man stood close to the man, who could now only blink his eyes. Bai Yi brought his head close to his father's ear and said that no matter how many professions he awakened, it had nothing to do with him. Lin Sheng watched apprehensively as the ice gradually engulfed more and more of his body. Bai Yi said that in his eyes, his father was a void, and he was ashamed to be related to him. Hearing this, Lin Sheng activated his inner strength and began to destroy the ice, saying that his son had become conceited after a little praise. But the boy had only recently awakened, and the man was an S-Class fighter, hardened in battle. Lin Sheng broke free from the ice, ready to show who was boss. Bai Yi was ready and just waiting for the right moment with his sword in his hands. In the next moment, the young man slashed his father with his blade. His father tried to cover his chest with his hands. The blow was so powerful that Lin Sheng felt the pressure and strength of his son upon him. He avoided a fatal wound, but the blow broke through his defense. Incredible for a novice boy. The blade pierced the man's chest, and blood spurted in all directions. Lin Sheng fell to his knees, unable to comprehend how this could have happened, since Bai Yi had only just awakened. Bai Yi stood over his father and declared that today they were no longer father and son. Lin Sheng, holding the blood with his hand, listened as his son said that his mother would no longer have anything to do with him. Bai Yi declared that from now on his father was nothing to him. The man sat on his knees, either laughing or crying. Lin Sheng said that he had worked his whole life to bring money into the house and feed his family. He insisted that Bai Yi would always be his son and that this could not be changed. The boy listened calmly, without reacting. Suddenly, the man gathered his last strength and lunged at his son in a frontal attack. The powerful kick was strong, but Bai Yi confidently caught up with his opponent and struck back. The young man then delivered a series of precise blows, and his father was unable to resist. One question remained in Lin Sheng's mind. Why couldn't he do anything, since he was an S-Class fighter? Bai Yi leaned over the man to deliver the final blow, declaring that his father was no match for him. For years, Lin Sheng had proven his place in the family through violence and fear. He beat his son and wife, calling the boy pathetic and worthless. Now Bai Yi was strong enough to teach his father a lesson and show him that he was unworthy of being called a man. Ruyan was terribly frightened, but she understood that her son was in no danger. Bai Yi pressed his father's head firmly to the ground, and his father began to appeal to his son's conscience, reminding him of their kinship. Lin Sheng claimed that he had raised his son and that they should not forget their blood ties. But words about kinship did not bring joy to Bai Yi, and old grievances flared up again. When his father beat him and his mother, he did not think about their kinship. When Lin Sheng was 7, he tore off a piece of his son's ear. Once he beat the boy, destroying everything around him. The child begged him to stop and promised not to upset his father. The man continued, causing serious harm to the child, and tore off his ear. It is impossible to forget how many times he beat his mother because of food, work, or his bad mood. Therefore, it was pointless to talk about kinship now. Bai looked down on his father, trying to understand what kind of kinship he deserved. After everything he had done to his family, it was hard to imagine what the man could expect. Bai Yi saw before him a pathetic man who had once terrorized his family. He tried to understand whether this man deserved to be called a father. Lin Sheng, unable to get up from his knees, began to beg for forgiveness, saying that he understood his mistakes and would never repeat them. Bai Lin Sheng literally knelt with his head pressed against the ground and begged his son for forgiveness, repeating that he was to blame. Bai Yi looked at his father and remembered that the last time the man had said the same thing when he realized he couldn't handle his son. That time, the man immediately fell to his knees and began to beg for forgiveness. Bai Yi believed his father's words, deciding that the man was truly repentant. But in the next moment, his father lunged at his son with a huge knife in his hands. Bai Yi was sure that once a person picked up a knife, they would not put it down. At that moment, the young man's adrenaline was literally skyrocketing. This stress increased his energy even more, and suddenly another evolution took place. He received the power of pure earth. The woman looked at her child. She was very worried about her son and wanted this nightmare to end as soon as possible. The purpose of the power of pure earth was to make the criminal repent. If this was impossible, the energy acted in such a way that the person could never do evil again. And now Lin Sheng was lying on the ground, bleeding profusely. His arm was badly damaged. The man continued to talk to his son, begging him not to kill him and to calm down, because they were father and son. Bai Yi did indeed begin to calm down slowly, although his adrenaline was still high. The young man immediately switched his energy, activated the freeze, and directed it at his father. The ice plugged the man's mouth, preventing him from continuing to whine, beg, and appeal to the boy's conscience and feelings. Bai Yi raised his sword above his head, saying that in his past life, his father had already died by his hand, so he would die again in this life as well. But suddenly, the young man heard a cry. "Bai Yi, stop!" Bai Yi couldn't understand who was speaking. The voice was clearly female, but whose was it? In fact, it was his mother's voice. The woman had not spoken for many years, but now her voice was transmitted to the plant lord. His mother told her son not to be like his father and to stop this cruel punishment. The woman was sure that her husband had already lost everything he could be proud of. From now on, every day of his life would be filled with regret and bitterness. That would be the ultimate punishment for Lin Sheng. The woman was absolutely firm and confident. She said she didn't want to see what was happening. But most of all, The mother did not want to see her son become like his biological father. And even more so, the woman did not want to see her only and beloved son, her protection and support, spend the rest of his life in prison. Bai Yi thought about it for a while, then agreed that his mother was absolutely right. The young man was ready to listen to her this time. Bai Yi promised his mother that he would not kill his father. However, he would make sure that his father could never come near them again. This was a skill he had learned in a previous life, and now the young man activated his dagger. The boy used the double-edged sentencing skill. It was used when the enemy was in a dying state. The skill released all the accumulated power and could either completely destroy the enemy or completely deprive them of their magic. Bai Yi turned to his father and said that he had deprived him of his awakening power, and from that moment on, the man would no longer be awakened. Bai Yi added that his father should leave the city tomorrow and never approach his family, wife, and son again. Bai Yi said that the flower lords remembered him, and if the man came within a few kilometers, they would immediately sense him. Bai Yi would kill his father, even if it meant rotting behind bars for the rest of his life. He would still do it without any mercy. Bai Linsheng, completely deprived of his magical powers on Earth, could only say that he understood everything. After that, Bai Yi went home with his mother and the flower lords. He asked the lords to heal his mother since they had such abilities. The red flower lord said there was no need to worry. Lin Sheng hadn't even touched the woman, and she was perfectly fine. She was just a little nervous. Bai Yi was very concerned about his mother's health. The boy sat down next to the woman and said that he was very glad that he had arrived in time. Otherwise, it could have ended badly. The woman said that she was absolutely fine because her flower bodyguards had already confirmed it. Mom ruffled her son's hair and told him not to worry. Bai Yi immediately wondered where he could get another jade stone for a pendant, but then the strangest thing finally dawned on them. His mother had just spoken. The woman said a few more words. Bai Yi couldn't be happier. It turned out that it wasn't telepathy. His mother had really started talking aloud again. Ruyan couldn't believe it. She didn't understand how she was able to say those words, but it turned out that her loss of voice was due to a minor injury, and the Flower Lord was able to cure her. A few days passed, and one day outside the city, the following conversation took place. The Flower Lords asked their master, "Can't the young man stay since his mother and friends are all here?" Bai Yi said that he had already paid the rent for the house and would be able to buy it later. The young man also left his mother a new jade pendant. If anything bad happened, he would return. The rest of the time, the young man counted on the Flower Lords. Bai Yi asked his summoned creatures to take care of his mother, but there was no need to worry about that. The three of them now spent all their time together in the kitchen and were inseparable. His mother knew nothing. She thought her son was leaving to study. The woman did not understand that Bai Yi was no longer the person she remembered. One day, the time would come when the young man would face hatred head-on. Now the guy had a pass to the Holy Land. This was where his worst enemy was, and it was the best chance he couldn't miss. This time, Bai Yi would be able to get to the Holy Land earlier than in his previous life and meet the man who had destroyed his team, a stranger in a mask with dreadlocks. Bai Yi was walking around the city with his mother, thinking about how his trip would end and whether he would return alive. But he had to get on that train, even if it was a one-way trip. At that moment, his mother looked at the moon and said that she had completely forgotten about the time. The woman noted that it was time for prayer. Every year on the first full moon of the summer holidays, the priestess, the goddess of flowers, returns to the association. Bai Yi remembered that his mother had once been a follower of the cult of the goddess of flowers. Bai Yi understood that it was the last day, and his mother had not asked him about the most important thing. The young man decided to leave quietly, leaving the woman to her prayers, because he had never been good at saying goodbye anyway. The bespectacled man lay in bed after the operation. The doctor said that the operation was not complicated and that it would only take a few days of rest to fully recover. All this was thanks to the fact that his son noticed something was wrong in time. His parents were scared, as all parents would be in such a situation. The boy's father thanked the doctor for saving his son, and his mother wouldn't even let him move. The boy tried to reassure his parents, saying that there was nothing to worry about, because even the doctor said that the operation was not complicated. However, his mother kept him in bed, saying that there are no simple operations and he should not move. The bespectacled boy knew that his savior would be leaving the next day. He was upset that he would not be able to see his friend off, and he was also unsure whether he would have the opportunity to meet him again, as the next day was the event in the Holy Land. Early the next morning, those who were preparing to leave for the Holy Land gathered at the train station. Shi Yin was with her mother, who asked her not to forget her and to call regularly, as well as to say hello to her father, who worked in the Holy Land. The woman continued to hug and kiss her daughter, as if saying goodbye forever. Shi Yin could hardly bear her mother's tenderness. The same situation was happening with other students. Their parents wished them success, asked them to come back soon, and wished them all the best. Bai Yi stood alone on the train platform. Teacher Huang approached him and asked why he was alone and why his parents had not come to see him off. Bai Yi did not answer. However, Teacher Huang was alarmed. Had Bai Yi always been so independent, or were his parents so indifferent to him? The sight of the boy standing alone made everyone feel sorry for him. Of course, Bai Yi would also like to see his relatives. but he had long been accustomed to loneliness. Many years ago, a tragedy had occurred in his life, and he was left an orphan after his mother died, and he killed his father with his own hands. Having lost his parents, another tragedy struck when Bai learned that his best friend had died suddenly from a lung disease. After that, there were more losses. Teachers, when his main mentor, Dunyan, passed away. He also lost friends and comrades in arms. Bai got used to the fact that all his loved ones were leaving his life one after another. His whole life was a continuous series of losses. The boy got used to it and even accepted the fact that he would lose everything. So it can be said that there was nothing new or unexpected in his life. Bai was about to board the train when he heard someone call his name. Bai turned at the sound of the voice, and it was clear from the look on his face that he was very surprised. Because of his past losses, the young man had never gotten used to having loved ones in his life. His mother appeared on the platform, along with his two closest friends. His mother announced that she had been looking for her son since early morning, and the boys said that it had been very difficult for them to escape from the hospital, but the bespectacled boy insisted and wanted to meet his savior one last time. Bai asked Xiaochen how he was feeling, because he needed to rest more. The boy replied that he was already completely fine and that there was no need to worry about him. But the bespectacled boy begged Bai to take care of himself and be sure to come back to them. At that moment, his friend handed him a bag with a gift. It contained clothes and some food. The boy thought that it would be very useful to his friend in the Holy Land. Shi Yin advised him not to hesitate and to accept the gift because it was given sincerely and with love. His mother gave her son a sacred amulet and a bracelet. The woman believed that they possessed special powers. His mother hoped that these items would help protect her son and that he would return to her soon after his studies. Bai guessed that his mother had gone to the temple of the goddess of flowers to pray for her son. Did she know that he was leaving for a long time? At that moment, Teacher Huang shouted for the children to hurry up and get on the train, which was about to depart. Their journey to raise their level officially began. Bai left his loved ones on the platform and boarded the train. In the months since his return, the young man's life had changed dramatically. His mother and friends smiled cheerfully at him and waved, asking him to eat well, rest, and send them photos. Bai waved back and thought about how he had already changed the lives of his closest friends and family. Now there were people in his hometown who were waiting for his return. Bai decided that once he had sorted everything out, he would definitely return home. A man on another platform watched the students leave, not wanting anyone to know he was there. The man said that someone was already on the train, he would arrive soon, and the things would get to him without any problems. It was the head of the temple of the goddess of flowers, Liu Zhongzheng. He asked if there was anything else he needed to pass on. In response, he was told that everything was fine now, and all they had to do was watch the boy. The students sat in the train car while their teacher Huang explained that the graduates had already left and had to complete their paperwork. They would soon reach the border of Zhang, and beyond it would be Shenhe. Therefore, it could be considered that the journey toward perfection had officially begun. It would take a day to reach the Holy Land, and according to the plan, the guys would be at the border tonight. First, they would undergo training in spiritual practice. Not far from Bai Yi, in the neighboring row, sat Zilan. The guy continued to hate Bai Yi and hoped that today's test would bring an unpleasant surprise to this petty, insolent person. Teacher Huang walked through the carriage and said, "Everyone knows that it was God who created our world, and he has always protected us. The divine family has supreme power. At present, 2 gods and their families live in the Holy Land. When children enter there, they must be extremely careful, obey the laws of the gods, and under no circumstances cause problems. To get from one country to the Holy Land, you have to go through 3 stages. The children had already passed the first stage before they boarded the train. After all, a special pass was required to board the train. This pass was a training ticket that allowed them to travel to the Holy Land. The second stage would be a border check, which would begin immediately after the train arrived at the station. All children must register and undergo a full inspection. The data check will take 1 day, and the children will only be able to leave the next day. The next stage and the first stop on the path to improvement will be practical training. The next morning, practical training was scheduled, which took place in a coastal wilderness area. Bai Yi changed into the clothes his classmate had given him. Qi Yin said that the young man looked more mature in them. Unfamiliar high school girls looked with interest at the boy who had rejected a whole group of beauties and did not want to join the Golden Guild. The girls had heard that this kid had scored the highest on the practical exam. They considered themselves very skilled in their fields. One was an electric spellcaster, and the other was a cloud swordsman. But Bai Yi rejected these girls as well. The level of monsters in this wild zone was too low to level up his profession. They were of little use. After S-Class, it became increasingly difficult to level up. Bai Yi tried to come up with something suitable for himself. A high school student named Zhang Jun said that he had also been the first in his time. In school exams, monsters are sealed and not so dangerous, but in reality, these creatures are completely different. The high school student flirted with the girls, saying that only in real combat can you see what you are truly capable of. They liked him very much too, and the girls asked him to take them with him on the next sweep. Bai Yi was absolutely delighted that the girls had found a new object of adoration and were not interfering with his goal. Teacher Huang announced that only the best students in the school would be going on the level up quest this time. Of course, the teachers had said this many times before, but the woman wanted to remind them once again. During practical training, it was important to remember a few things. First, train only in the designated area. Second, in extreme situations, act according to the circumstances and escape if danger arises. Third, they needed to conserve their stamina because it would come in handy. Fourth and fifth, there was too much moralizing. A senior named Liu grabbed his new friends and said he didn't want to listen to the rules. If anything happened, it would be their own fault. The chance to go hunting doesn't come often, and the young man led the girls away. Zilin, as always, stood with a sullen face, watching what was happening, because this envious guy had come up with another nasty trick. Meanwhile, in the Holy Land, it was announced that the master had returned. A hunting tournament was about to begin, and the team captain was already waiting for his master. The elite squad could travel to the tournament without even passing through border control. The chief commander of the elite squad ordered one of the guys to go to the team and wait for him there. The young man agreed to carry out this order without question. At that time in the wilderness, high school student Liu was destroying plant monsters. The guy was doing pretty well, especially since two beauties were watching him hunt and supporting him with shouts and cheers. The high school student continued to show off in front of the girls, saying that he didn't see anything special and that this was his usual level. Bai Yi now had 3 S-Class professions, but he had been stuck at the same level for more than 10 days. To gain experience, you need to defeat monsters below your level. However, in the wild, the strongest magical beasts the boy could encounter were no higher than D-Class. Everyone associated with the Wild Zone had outstanding combat skills, but killing monsters below your level was of little use. At that moment, an 8-armed spider, a flower-type monster, wounded senior student Liu, who fell to the ground and screamed in agony. The spider was excessively ferocious, and the girls realized that such an opponent was beyond their capabilities. Zhongjun yelled at the girls to hurry up and help him and heal his wound, because the spider was much stronger than a normal D-Class monster. The group turned around and saw a huge 8-armed monster rushing straight at Bai Yi. The young man made a single swing with his sword and killed the 8-legged spider, gaining experience and earning a poisonous spider leg. He thought this item was low level and would only take up space in his backpack, so he decided not to take it. The high school students were stunned to see that Bai Yi didn't need the D-Class spider leg and threw it on the ground, continuing on his way deeper into the territory. Bai Yi remembered that several high-level magic crystals were located on the border of the Holy Land. If the guy went deeper, he might find something useful. It was already late in the evening, and Bai Yi was still wandering in the forest. He was able to find many magic crystals, but it was very strange. These stones were full of energy, and they usually appeared in places where magical beasts gathered, or near magical abysses, but the magical energy in these crystals had dried up. It seemed that someone had recently absorbed it. The trees nearby were also dry, as if someone had sucked all the sap out of them. He needed to figure out what kind of creature was capable of absorbing the energy around so quickly. Bai Yi understood that no D-Class monster was capable of such a thing. Soon the young man reached the waterfall, and there was no way to go further. But soon he stumbled upon something unusual. This object clearly did not belong in this area. Some strange flask had been broken, and a green liquid had spilled onto the ground. At that time, all the students, together with their teacher Huang, had built a fire and were cooking their dinner on it, because the teacher had defeated many monsters on her own. Training is an imitation of survival in the wild, and searching for food is an integral part of it. The children had been fighting all day, so now they needed to eat. They didn't even prepare food during the level up. It was too cruel. Besides, the strange roasted tentacles didn't look edible. Teacher Huang looked around at the children and noticed that Bai Yi and Zilin were missing. They should have left food for them too, in case they came back hungry. Qiyin had always thought that the teacher was only good at theory, and she didn't expect to see how good Huang was in combat. Teacher Huang admitted that she had actually dreamed of joining the Gods Guild or passing the High Priest exam, but she lacked the ability and couldn't even try. The woman noted that this was her first time in the Holy Land, so she had to thank her best students. After all, thanks to Qiyin and Bai Yi, the teacher was able to see what she wanted to see, and she now had a chance to join Shenhe. But before they could finish talking, a strange sound rang out, and Huang immediately jumped up and pushed Qiyin to the ground. The blow struck teacher Huang squarely in the chest, and blood spurted everywhere. The students were really scared. They didn't understand what was happening. Their teacher was dying before their eyes. At that moment, Bai Yi was running through the forest and realized that something terrible had happened. He had to warn all the children to leave. Teacher Huang, struggling to contain the pain, shouted at the children to run away because it was extremely dangerous there. She managed to warn the children to find the nearest guild. But it seemed too late. A huge B-class monster emerged from the forest. It was a corpse spider, and it was very pleased to see a large amount of nutrients. In the morning, a few hours before these tragic events, Zilin was wandering around the area. As always, he was full of malice and hatred because all the attention was going to Bai Yi. The guy was carrying some kind of strange container in his hand. A very small monster was locked inside it. When he reached the forest, the young man broke the container and released the monster. The monster immediately began to absorb the nutrients in the area. Zilin was waiting for the moment when his friends and classmates would be in despair, and then finally the guys would see who the real savior was. After a while, Zilin went to check on the monster he had released a couple of hours earlier, but something strange had happened. Very little time had passed, but the creature was growing too fast. Now the young man saw a huge, monstrous monster that was many times stronger and larger than a human being. Teacher Huang was seriously injured, and several other students had various injuries. But they were all losing strength because the large spider was sucking the nutrients out of them. Bai Yi still hadn't reached the camp. In his previous life, he had already encountered scorpions. But even after rebirth, defeating such a creature required enormous effort. The monster was good at attacking and defending, and it could also hide in walls. Its strength was incredibly high, but none of the kids in the forest had a rank higher than C, so no one could handle this monster. Bai Yi understood that even if he gave it his all, he would not be able to defeat the corpse spider either. Besides, the young man didn't want to use all his strength so that other people wouldn't find out about his profession, because he didn't want to attract the attention of God. Soon, there was no one left in the camp who was in good physical shape. In an instant, all the kids were knocked to the ground. Teacher Huang realized that the creature's attack caused paralysis. The woman had no idea what to do, and her chest wound was bleeding profusely. The corpse spider was an intelligent monster. It enjoyed its victims and considered them to be very tasty nutrients. Teacher Huang couldn't let the monster devour her, so she tried to attract its attention very easily. She said that if it didn't want the monster to eat her students, it would have to use Plan B. It announced that it would start with the teacher and opened its huge mouth, which resembled a flower. The huge mouth opened over the woman, ready to swallow her. At that moment, the monster was struck by powerful sword blows. Teacher Huang saw that someone was standing between her and the corpse spider and fighting. Bai Yi tried to repel the monster's attack, blocked it, and tried to cut the toothy flower. He even managed to do so. The young man understood that this was only a brief respite, but at least for now, he was able to protect his teacher and save her from death. Bai Yi understood that the attacks of an S-Class warrior were completely useless against the monster. The young man struck blows, but the corpse spider did not even move. Bai Yi changed his profession to a cloud mage and tried to restrain the monster in any way he could. He activated an ice prison, which instantly created a freeze from the air, enveloping all enemies in front of him. And indeed, for a while, the corpse spider was immobilized. By this point, the guys had recovered a little and began to get up after their paralysis. They watched in awe as Bai Yi froze the B-class monster. But this guy was a warrior. Finally, the guys realized that the young man had two professions. Bai Yi realized that he was in a hopeless situation and had no choice. Even if everyone found out about his secret, he had to save the guys. Teacher Huang didn't know how to help the young man. She understood that he couldn't defeat the monster alone. And indeed, the ice began to crack slowly. It was impossible to think that this ice trap would solve the problem. Within a few seconds, all the ice cracked and crumbled into small pieces. The children saw that the corpse spider was nowhere to be found. It had disappeared or even died. Bai Yi understood that this was not the end. The young man had only wounded the monster, and it had temporarily retreated, but it would reappear at any moment. The boy ordered everyone to retreat immediately because he did not have enough strength to kill the monster. Teacher Huang told the children to leave, but she had to stay. None of the children understood why. Bai Yi immediately guessed that someone else had not yet arrived. Teacher Huang knew that according to school rules, no student should be left alone. They all agreed to meet at the broken camp in the evening, and it would be bad if a student came and found no one there. Bai Yi handed the container he had found to the teacher and said that this guy had released the monster. The man in the mask with dreadlocks brought 2 bowls of food and announced that today's breakfast would be spicy dumplings. Lucia was very happy because these were his favorite dumplings, and he hoped they would be spicy enough. Bai Yi also quickly finished his portion. The stranger in the mask with dreadlocks told the girl that she needed to moderate her appetite, otherwise she would get fat and no one would pay attention to her. Then the young man felt that his body was no longer obeying him, and he did not understand what had happened to him. But at that moment, a man in a mask with dreadlocks appeared. He said that for the past few months, he had been mixing a special spicy powder into his breakfast. It was necessary to get rid of the strongest ones, because without thorough preparation, it would be impossible to succeed. And now the situation was repeating itself. A dangerous monster had been released by one of his close friends. Shi Yin studied the label and found that the product belonged to a corporation headed by the Zilin family. Their laboratory studies mutants, so they used special vessels to store many specimens. Bai Yi found a fragment of a vessel for miniature creatures deep in the forest. No one but the people from this corporation could have put it there. Zilin hid in the forest and watched what was happening in the clearing from a distance. The young man realized from overhearing the conversations that his plan had been exposed, and he was very angry. His classmates and friends did not understand how their friend could have done this to them. Zilin realized that he had lost again, and once more saw only one enemy in everything. After all, the main culprit was Bai Yi, who was always one step ahead. The boys didn't understand why their friend had done such a thing. Did he really want to ruin them all? They believed he should definitely be sent to prison. Some doubted and didn't believe that Zilin was such a scoundrel, but his absence spoke for itself. In any case, Teacher Huang said that the children had to leave immediately. She handed them the walkie-talkie and ordered them to go in search of a signal. Shi Yin took the radio from the teacher's hands when suddenly there was a flash, or even a bang. The girl fell, dropping the radio. Shi Yin was frightened and looked at her bloody hand. It turned out that someone had shot her. The target, of course, was not the girl herself, but the radio, which now lay on the ground completely destroyed and useless. But the trouble didn't end there. Suddenly, strange smoke bombs were thrown in the direction of the school children. They hit the ground and began to emit smoke. The children immediately began to cough violently and feel suffocated. The students smelled a pungent powder. They couldn't breathe even though they were outside. Everything around them was engulfed in green smoke and fog. But suddenly, the silhouette of a man appeared out of the fog. Bai Yi activated one of his protective functions and stood completely calm, ignoring the suffocating smoke. The stranger was wearing a gas mask and watching what he had done. Zilin, for it was he, realized that now all the guys knew that this was his doing, and no one should get out of this clearing. Bai Yi, already completely entangled in the protective smoke, approached Zilin and asked him what he intended to do. Even without asking, Bai Yi understood that the villain wanted to kill absolutely all of the kids. At that moment, the students began to feel their bodies becoming heavy. Their coughing did not stop, and they felt very ill. This was followed by paralysis. It became clear that this was a paralyzing powder, usually used to subdue dangerous animals. The children did not understand why this poisonous powder was being used against them. Zilin himself was frightened when he realized what he had done. He said that he had prepared this powder for a large spider that he wanted to destroy in front of all the children. And he wanted to do all this only because of a petty upstart. Bai Yi, his love and admiration. Zilin prepared his flaming bow and said that all his problems were constantly connected with Bai Yi. The boy pulled the bowstring and was about to shoot, while Bai Yi calmly approached his opponent without showing any aggression. Teacher Huang tried to stop the tragedy, telling Zilin that it was not too late to stop the killing. The teacher asked him not to make a mistake, because the young man had accidentally released the beast and did not really want to endanger all the children. But Zilin insisted that things had gone too far and it was too late. Nothing could be fixed now, and there was no need to try to deceive him. Teacher Huang could no longer move. The powder was very strong and had a powerful effect. Bai Yi understood that if things continued like this, he would also be paralyzed. The young man stabbed himself in the leg with a dagger. Bai Yi turned to Teacher Huang, who was already unable to move, and said that this time Zilin was indeed right. What he had done could not be undone. Things had gone too far, no matter how difficult it was, and no matter what the reasons were. Zilin had shot the arrow because his nerves could no longer take it. Bai Yi shouted, "How dare this fool raise his weapon against his own people?" And his adrenaline level rose significantly from everything that was happening. Bai Yi deflected the blow with lightning speed and immediately counterattacked. The severed weapon, along with the hand that held it, flew upward. Zilin watched his severed hand fly away, filled with horror and surprise. Bai Yi had no intention of stopping, for before him stood a true traitor who deserved no mercy. Zilin sobbed, clutching the stump of his arm, and cried out that he was in pain and that his opponent had clearly gone mad. But then the young man became enraged again and began to accuse Bai Yi, saying that it was all his fault. Bai Yi understood that this cowardly and pathetic murderer had been hiding in the bushes all this time. Zilin had simply watched the unfolding disaster from behind the trees, then saw his teacher wounded and his classmates dying. The boy watched as the disaster he had created spiraled out of control. It was a horrific scene. The giant spider tried to kill his friends and almost devoured his teacher. Zilin burst into tears and sobbed with fear, afraid that he would not be able to defeat such a monster. He wanted to say something else, but suddenly felt that his actions were no longer under his control. Bai Yi was angry, pointed his weapon at the villain, and said that he must be prepared to answer for his actions, since he had once made a decision. Zilin began to realize that he was facing a real madman. Terrified, crying, and choking on blood, the young man realized that Bai Yi really was going to kill him. Bai Yi used the mark of retribution. It was used when the enemy was close to death and unleashed all its accumulated power. In order to reduce his opponent to a pitiful nothingness and sever his connection to magic forever, Zilin became an ordinary person and lost his ability to awaken. Bai Yi had already completed his act of vengeance when he suddenly heard a voice calling out to him. The young man saw a large spider, which was once again whole and unharmed, and its bloodthirsty flower had seized the teacher. Bai Yi realized that the magical beast had recovered and was ready to kill again. In addition, all the children were lying paralyzed on the clearing after inhaling the poisonous smoke. Of course, the paralyzing powder had also affected the large spider. Now it could barely move. However, even if Bai Yi gave it his all, he would hardly be able to defeat the monster. But the young man had no other choice. All he could do was wait for the right moment to attack. Bai Yi stood waiting when suddenly flashes of golden energy began to appear around him. It turned out that the toothy flower had been cut off and was lying on the ground, with Qi Yin falling out of it. Teacher Huang supported the girl, who was unconscious after the smoke attack and her time in the monster's mouth. Hanliu arrived just in time. With 2 movements, she destroyed the corpse spider and saved all the children. It turned out that the monster was not yet dead, but only wounded. Han Lei said that she could not defeat it alone and hoped that Bai Yi would fight alongside her. Bai Yi was, of course, shocked, but it was not yet time to ask all the questions he wanted to ask. The monster had to be destroyed. Suddenly, the spider disappeared, which greatly surprised the girl, but Bai Yi explained that the monster could change color. The corpse spider was wounded and immediately disguised itself to recover its health. Bai Yi explained that all his companions were paralyzed by the powder and would remain motionless for some time. Hanla saw that the young man was holding up well and threw him an object. She said she only had one recovery potion and that the young man had to take it now. For some reason, the Golden Guild was delayed, and it was unclear when they would arrive. The girl looked around carefully, trying to determine the monster's location. Bai Yi was sure that the corpse spider was still here, absorbing the energy around it. Suddenly, the corpse spider rushed to attack and was about to strike from behind. However, the young man managed to use his weapon to block the blow, but he couldn't completely neutralize the damage. Hanya immediately took advantage of the spider becoming visible and began to deliver cutting blows. Hanyo and Bai Yi repelled another attack from the monster and now stood shoulder to shoulder, preparing to continue in the same vein. The young man had already recovered his health and said that he would fight alongside the girl and they would do their best. The guy noted that the girl's attack and reaction were excellent, but she was still a student and should be careful. The beauty replied that he was also a student, but he spoke as if he were already an adult and experienced warrior. At that moment, the spider regained consciousness and began to threaten everyone, declaring that now absolutely everyone would die. Bai Yi regained his confidence and, feeling his strength, rushed to attack the monster with his new partner. The young man struck blows, but they had no effect. Hanlei tried to do what she could with her golden sword. After a while, it became clear that the corpse spider's armor was impossible to penetrate. In addition, Hanlei began to choke and cough, and she was wounded, and Bai Yi had already drunk the life-giving healing liquid. It became clear that the spider's attacks were poisonous, and the girl was already showing signs of poisoning. Bai Yi struck blow after blow, trying to damage the enemy in any way he could. Han Yue noticed that the boy's defense had reached the level of the best warriors, but it was really just bravado. The large spider was still very strong. Instead of weakening, the monster continued to absorb the local power and increase its strength. The trees around them turned into dry sticks. The giant spider drank their natural juices, becoming stronger and stronger, its power and potential constantly evolving. If this continued, it was clear that the kids would not survive until help arrived from the guild. The students were very weak now and couldn't handle such a monster, and Han Yo was injured. Therefore, they needed to break through the corpse spider's defense as soon as possible. Bai Yi was thinking about how he could do that. He remembered that earlier in his life, there had been a situation where a warrior faced an equal or even stronger enemy, and the battle reached a stalemate. Lucian suggested retreating, but Leno believed that the Divine Squad had no option to retreat at all. But there was always the option of a decoy plan. First, attack the enemy with all your might and force them to focus their firepower on one player. When the enemy took the bait, they would be completely focused on the battle, and it would be possible to activate acceleration. Then you had to be very careful and wait for the right moment. Bai Yi noticed that his partner wanted to join the fight, but he forbade her to attack and ordered her to stay where she was and save her strength. Han Yu froze, not understanding what was happening. Was this guy really going to take on the corpse spider alone? The girl understood that it was too dangerous. No matter how outstanding a warrior he was still just a student. And it was she, Han Yu, who possessed the gold class. So why shouldn't she attack now? But then she realized that he had some kind of plan. She also felt that she was looking at a real leader, albeit a very young one. At that moment, a large spider knocked the sword out of Bai Yi's hands and wounded him. The girl was about to rush into the attack, but the young man shouted at her to stay where she was and not move. Hanliu did not move, regaining her strength and watching as the corpse spider enjoyed killing Bai Yi. The monster became engrossed in conversation, saying that humans would eventually become its food. It said a lot more, but Bai Yi waited for the right moment and shouted, "Let's go now!" The girl instantly activated her evasion, and the discharge passing through her body increased her speed of movement. Last time, she managed to wound the spider just as it was trying to devour someone. Now its toothy mouth was approaching Bai Yi. This meant that the spider's defenses would drop at the moment of consumption. The most important step was to wait for the moment when the enemy was busy and showed a weak spot. Hananyu used an electric blade that paralyzed the target upon impact. She knew she had to crush the enemy instantly. The corpse spider immediately activated its automatic physical defense. Bai Yi, covering and healing his wound, decided it was time for the final step. The young man used a stun attack, and for a while the corpse spider was completely paralyzed. Hanlo said that her control would wear off in a few seconds, and if the creature attacked again, she would not be able to cope with it. Bai Yi replied that this would be enough time for him, and this time he would not let the monster escape. The young man instantly changed his class to Cloud Mage, and a magic wand reappeared in his hands. He immediately used his freezing skill, and the huge corpse spider was once again encased in ice. Han Yue watched the young man in surprise, amazed that he had mastered 2 classes. Bai switched to the nuclear warfare class. He had accumulated enough strength thanks to his wounds and fatigue. Now the young man was ready to use that strength to destroy his enemy. The Holy Land's skill alone was enough to end the battle. The corpse spider was completely defeated, and the young man received a promotion in all levels, a huge amount of experience points, and a web for creating armor. His health was completely restored. Hanla looked at the young man. She knew that there were few warriors in the world who possessed two elements, and to awaken two classes at such a young age was unheard of. Bai Yi changed his class to Flower Summoner. E-rank summoners could contract with 6 monsters, which meant he could still choose 4 more. Han Yue didn't understand what was happening before her eyes. Bai Yi used the Flower Spirit contract skill and subjugated the corpse spider. The contract was successfully concluded, and the corpse spider awaited its master's orders. Bai Yi said that the name corpse spider was too complicated and long, so he decided to give his ward a name. Now he was simply called Strong Guy. The E-rank corpse spider named Strong Guy was completely satisfied. He now looked like a cute little animal and could be kept as a pet or used to guard some kind of facility. Hanl approached the young man. He had just changed classes again, and now he had 3 of them. The young man was like a walking box of surprises. Bai Yi noticed that she was clearly surprised and said that there was a reason for all this. Han Yer understood that with so many classes, the guy didn't show them on the final exam, which meant he didn't want to attract unnecessary attention. The girl said she was good at keeping secrets, so he could relax and trust her. At that moment, warriors from the guild ran into the clearing, ready to rescue everyone. They were representatives of the Guild of Gods, the Eastern Border Detachment, who had finally arrived and were ready to help. The warriors saw the body of the B-rank corpse spider and were surprised that the monster had already been killed. Then they began to heal and restore all the students, pouring healing potions into them. Gradually, the children began to come to their senses. Qi Yin was still in shock because just a moment ago, she had almost been devoured by the monster. Teacher Huang tried to calm the girl down, saying that it was all over now. The representatives of the Guild of Gods were amazed at how the kids had managed to defeat an E-rank monster. It was truly remarkable. They immediately decided that these 2 students were true geniuses. The high school students came to their senses and realized that they had survived only thanks to Bai Yi's heroism and strength. The boys sincerely thanked him for saving them and decided to become good friends and support each other in the future. Representatives of the Guild of Gods healed their wounds and asked why Han Yo had come here alone. After all, she was the commander of the squad and should understand what was going on. It was too dangerous and the commander could have been hurt, but the girl said that everything had turned out fine and there was no need to worry. Besides, the commander should not be underestimated. She was a gold class, and such talent was born only once every few years. Hanyo listened to the admiring words of her subordinates, but she understood that today she had met a true genius. Bai Yi was that genius and remained full of mysteries. When all the students had been restored and healed, the teacher took roll call. It turned out that 1 student was missing. The rest were sent on a special train, and representatives of the guild were to search for the missing one. At that moment, another container for transporting monsters was broken in the wild zone. Sillin rushed away, shouting for the monster not to come near him. He had not released the monster so that it could eat him. The monster was stupid and was supposed to attack others, but it was Zillin who was eaten. The exhausted students were transported on a special train belonging to the Guild of Gods. It turned out that the corpse spider had enormous growth potential. If trained properly, it would become a powerful combat unit. A representative of the guild reported that the students had been successfully met and were now all traveling on the special train. Bai Yi continued to analyze his data. He had increased his mage level, but it was still insignificant. Monsters of rank C and above were mainly controlled by clans and guilds. He needed to find a way to gain more experience. At that moment, the train entered the coastal tunnel. After passing through the tunnel, everyone arrived in the long-awaited holy state. Bai Yi looked out the train window and thought about how he had finally returned here. This was the very place where he had met all those people he wanted to see again. However, his goal was now completely different. The country of Shenhe was located near the eastern border. The train arrived at East Campus Station. The city was huge, and this was immediately apparent even from the station and the nearby houses. The kids looked around in awe. This was the richest country in the world, and everything here was different. The students were greeted by the director of the Eastern District Academy. He said that he would personally give them a tour of the world's highest educational institution for the awakened. This institution was the Shenbin Academy, where the students had come. Bai Yi knew that the guy had studied at Shenbin Academy. If the timing was right, that guy was currently studying hard within the walls of the academy. Bai Yi said, looking at the educational institution, "Chris, we need to meet." The director showed the students a monument to one of the 5 great founding gods, Cadmus Davis. Everyone knew that the Davis clan was now the most powerful, and they dreamed of meeting at least one of its representatives. The guys were delighted to see the statue in person. Of course, they did not hope to meet any of the Celestials in person, but suddenly someone would get lucky or a miracle would happen. The academy director said that in the year when the Chaos Dragon appeared, exterminating people and devouring the land, the great Cadmus appeared. He was able to unite the strongest, founded the Guild of Divine Masters as well as this academy. The Shenbin Academy is the pinnacle of the awakened world, the undisputed #1, and each year it accepts only 100 students from all over the world. Candidates must not only have a rank of at least B, but also pass a grueling entrance exam. The students understood that they would not reach rank B, because at school they worked hard to get at least rank D. Indeed, there are only a handful of B-rank awakened ones in the entire country, and getting into the academy before reaching adulthood is simply unrealistic. Bai listened to the director's story and realized that it was in these hellish conditions that Chris, who had graduated from the academy, had studied. The teacher brought him in and said that the students should meet their new partner, Chris. Of course, it was forbidden to share information about each other's past, but the teacher whispered that Chris was the best graduate of the Shenbin Academy. Bai believed that Chris was currently studying at the academy. The young man had to urgently raise his rank, become stronger than Chris, and be sure to enter the academy. Chi Yin listened to the principal's story and recalled that Bai Yi was going to stay at this school, which meant that the young man must have had a plan. But then the girl's thoughts were interrupted by a man who asked why she hadn't visited her father right away. Chi Yin was clearly embarrassed by such attention. The academy director bowed to the man and greeted Secretary Chen. The secretary reported that the girl's father had completely worn himself out. He had fallen ill a few days ago, but had forbidden anyone to tell anyone about it. Yin immediately rushed to the car to go and see her father. The students watched her go with surprise. They didn't understand who this girl was. If the academy director treated his secretary with such respect, she must be some kind of important person. But then an even more powerful car pulled up, a huge black limousine that parked right next to the school children. The kids were even more surprised. They didn't understand who or what it was, and thought that all cars in Shengi were that cool. A group of very fashionable and businesslike young people got out of the car and approached the academy director. The academy director reprimanded the students for being late. However, the guys did not feel guilty at all. They said that they cleaned the dungeon every night, so they overslept a little, and the director should take that into account. There had been a very fierce battle the night before, so the guys overslept a little. The academy director did not argue or scold them, but instead introduced the team that would also be participating in the training trip. They were local students from Shanghai who belonged to the prestigious private Eastern Academy. The students noted that these local guys had very cool outfits and generally looked older and more confident. The director wanted to introduce these guys in more detail, but he was abruptly interrupted. The leader of the local students was very arrogant. He said that there was no point in introducing them to some nobodies, because these students from a vassal country were just commoners and plebeians. Teacher Huang, along with the high school students, looked at the arriving team and realized that there were only 5 of these students. The local kids literally burst out laughing. They were indeed country bumpkins who had never heard of private academies. The boys said they belonged to the aristocracy of this country. Therefore, there couldn't be too many of them, like some kind of rabble. They had a completely different level of education and resources. The point was not that there were only 5 of them, but that there were only 5 students in their entire school, and all the academy's resources were devoted exclusively to them. This information greatly surprised the visiting students, but as public school students, it was difficult for them to understand. Such an arrogant attitude angered senior student Liu, who demanded that the leader stop humiliating them. However, the local leader had no intention of watching his language, because a place at the academy had already been prepared for him and his comrades. He was only in his 2nd year, but had already reached level 30. One more step, and the guy would get a B rank. They didn't come here to train, but simply to look around. Liu was very upset by this attitude, but he didn't lose hope and said that their elite team would wipe the floor with the locals. The locals, however, were not appeased. They claimed that they had already worked together perfectly and had even cleared a D-rank dungeon yesterday with flying colors, a record for all students. The guys thought they shouldn't bother with these weaklings. They probably hadn't even seen a D-rank dungeon. How could ordinary people from poor neighborhoods know how the aristocracy lived? Hearing this was very unpleasant, and the students were angry. Bai Yi tried not to react to the chatter. He just listened as the local elite group talked about how their goal was to become blessed, while the weaklings would be stuck living in their village. Bai Yi knew that blessed was the highest social status available to people without divine blood. It was a goal that everyone aspired to, the pinnacle that he had reached in his past life. Of course, it sounded ridiculous, but he had staked his life on ultimately no longer desiring the gods in such a life. But his attention was distracted by the loud rattling of a propeller that suddenly appeared above their heads. The school children looked up and watched in amazement. Indeed, the country was a curiosity. In fact, at that moment, the personal transport of the divine clan was landing in front of the children. No one understood why it had flown here. Soon the helicopter opened its doors and a man stepped out, announcing that it seemed that all the students were already assembled. The students watched in amazement and tried to guess who this man was who had arrived in such a strange vehicle. It was a blessed one from the DB's clan named Lin Feng. The man approached the group of students and said that, according to his information, there should be a student named Bai Yi among them. The local students did not know who he was or why Lin Feng himself was interested in this student. Bai Yi stepped out of the crowd and introduced himself, giving his name. Lin Feng adjusted his glasses and asked if it was true that this young man had single-handedly cleared the D-rank dungeon during the trial test. The Divine Debus clan was very interested in the achievements of such a promising student. The clan would soon be holding a hunting tournament and invited Bai Yi to personally participate as a spectator. The local players were stunned. They couldn't understand how this youngster was able to clear the D-rank dungeon single-handedly and even receive an invitation from the Divine Clan. Lin Feng pointed to the helicopter and invited Bai Yi to follow him. Bai Yi remained focused and calm, showing no emotion, just watching what was happening. 100 years ago, the world was plunged into chaos, and monsters with great magical power descended upon the earth. Humanity was powerless to resist them, but 5 powerful deities appeared, defending the people and exterminating the monsters. Under the protection of the gods, the world was saved, and all the monsters were defeated. Since then, people have been filled with reverence for their saviors and have begun to worship them. To protect humanity, the gods remained in the mortal world, bestowed knowledge and power upon humans, created a powerful army, and established new laws. The gods began to form alliances with humans and left behind offspring. The direct descendants of the gods came to be known as the Divine Clan. This was the well-known story that all people knew, and all of humanity lived under the rule of these gods. The leader of the local school children said that they also wanted to attend the hunting tournament, since it was taking place on the lands of the Divine Clan. Ordinary people were not allowed there, let alone watch the hunt. Lin Feng said that the educational trip was organized by the Fiba family, so all students were invited. There was still time before the excursion to the guild, and anyone who wanted to could go with them. The students who had arrived were stunned when they realized they had a chance to enter the land of the gods. Even the high school students understood how cool this was, because only the nobility were allowed into this territory. They were really lucky. Lin Feng said that if everyone was okay with it, they could follow him. The divine family of Thebes owned the heavenly city. Their residence was above their domain, and they truly watched over life from above the clouds like gods. At that time, there were 5 divine families scattered throughout the world, and the Thebes family lived in this place. They were all descendants of the god Cadmus. Now they led the strongest army in the world, the Guild of Gods. In addition, they ran the Academy of Divine Weapons, so the selection and leadership of the troops rested entirely on the shoulders of the Thebes family. The awakened academies in other countries were also under their jurisdiction. The Fiba family became interested in Bai Yi because of his graduation exam results. It was clear that they were selecting the best students for their ranks. But why they chose a hunting tournament for the meeting remained a question. The divine inhabitants lived in a huge palace created from the best works of art of humanity. Genius creations from all over the world were gathered here. Bai Yi was very serious and focused. He would finally meet the Divine Clan again. A representative of the Divine family said that his grandfather once spoke about art. Art is the only trace that humanity leaves behind. But the father of this clan representative believed that ruins were more important than art. Shin Debus, the divine heir of the First Order, personally claimed that turning everything into ruins was true art. The school children were shocked and listened silently, their mouths agape. The local kids bowed and demanded that the visitors also bow quickly, instead of staring at the representative of the god race like country bumpkins. Had they forgotten what their parents had taught them? Bai Yi knew that Shin Debus was the eldest son and the pinnacle of power in this world. After Shin Debus left the room, everyone was able to straighten up and continue on their way. All the children were taken to the central district of the Heavenly City, where the hunting grounds were located. Now they finally saw with their own eyes what they had only heard about in fairy tales. The hunting grounds were simply enormous. Monstrous giant creatures were located literally behind a thin wall that seemed unreliable, but this was deceptive. Seated in their thrones were the heirs of the Divine Clan, as Ode and Aliode. They did not care how many participants had arrived or who they were. In another chair sat the plump Lok Jin, who ordered himself some iced coffee with sugar. Ali Jin said she didn't need anything. She was a very pretty, sweet girl. These were the grandchildren of divine families who had come to watch the hunt. Bai Yi did not expect that 3 divine families would gather on the first day. Lin Feng announced that the hunting tournament was about to begin, but first he wanted to explain the rules and nuances so that the kids would find it more interesting to watch. The entire tournament was held in a giant arena. The essence of the competition was simple. The awakened must defeat the magical beasts. The local monsters were creatures of rank that the Divine Guild had captured from all over the world, and specially raised for this day. The awakened were volunteers from different corners of the world. To ensure that the hunt was not too easy, only those who had not reached level B were allowed to participate. Everyone competed on their own behalf. 10 points are awarded for killing 1 ranked monster. The winners are determined by the final ranking. There was also a table of the value of different monsters. The students figured out that since the monsters were S rank and the participants had not reached B rank, their strengths were roughly equal. Usually, whole groups go after monsters of this level. It was immediately clear that only the truly brave had signed up for this hunt. Even representatives of the Golden Guild watched the proceedings with interest. Lin Feng said that this year the tournament coincided with a holiday. Therefore, the Dibas family had prepared a truly royal reward for the winner, which was kept in a special chest. When all the details had been explained, Lin Feng announced that the tournament would begin shortly and asked everyone to welcome the participants. This year, only 12 players entered the hunting tournament. It was immediately apparent that the most experienced and strongest hunters from all over the world had gathered. The guys looked through the list of participants and realized that they were all experienced fighters because it was extremely difficult to deal with a monster of their level, and here there were hundreds of monsters for only 12 people. It looked like suicide, but the reward would be substantial, high-level equipment, and, if they were lucky, a gift from the gods themselves. Bai Yi listened to his companions' arguments. Although they were in awe, they still valued their lives and were afraid to even imagine themselves next to such a creature. Shin Diba suddenly turned his head toward the students and addressed Bai Yi directly. He knew that this boy had single-handedly cleared a D-rank dungeon in middle school. Not a bad start to his career. Shin Diba suggested killing a rank monster right now and showing his class. Even the local fighters were shocked. Going after a monster alone was crazy. How could the organizers suggest such a thing? Henya understood why Bai Yi had been invited to the tournament. The day before, they had killed a B-rank demon together, so the young man would definitely be able to handle an S-rank. However, Bai Yi, as always, loved to surprise everyone. He said that he would not participate in a normal level hunt. He declared that one monster was not enough for him, and since he had come here, he asked for permission to participate in the hunt on equal terms with the other hunters. The locals could no longer control themselves. They couldn't believe their ears and decided that they had imagined it all. The Oda brothers, who had come to watch the hunt, were thrilled. This schoolboy was going to participate. It really seemed incredible. Bai Yi knew that in the normal world, S-rank monsters were impossible to find even in broad daylight. The young man needed to rise to level B, and this was his only chance to level up quickly. In addition, there were 3 representatives of the clan of gods here today, and Bai Yi wanted them to remember him. He was going to put on the most exciting show of their lives for these spectators. Before the representatives of the heavenly clans could respond, Han Yue raised her hand and said she wanted to participate too. Her deputy volunteered to go hunting with her. Thus, a team of 3 representatives from the guests was formed. The local players did not understand what these visitors were talking about. The required level for entry was rank C, and all applicants met this requirement. It was very curious. For the first time, the students themselves decided to participate in the hunting games, and Shin Dibis approved their application. The locals believed that the villagers simply wanted to show off in front of the gods. Of course, there were cases when the gods chose someone as their apostle for outstanding achievements. The leader of the local players raised his hand and said that he would also participate. He was warned that there were no teleports in the hunting games, and if something happened, no one would save anyone. The local school children tried to cheer themselves up. They didn't consider themselves to be anything special in terms of rank. The local aristocrat was sure that they were no worse than these worthless kids from the vassal countries. In the end, 8 more people joined the hunt. Some of the students belonged to a private academy, and 3 were from the country of Zhang. The spectators from the Divine Plains were very pleased with the situation. The hunt was becoming interesting even before it began. Lak Jin asked the Oda brothers who they would bet on. The brothers decided to bet $1 million on the students of the local academy. They had received an elite education, second only to their own, so these players could in no way be compared to some bugs from nowhere. Shin Dibis announced that he would personally bet on Bai Yi. One of the twins laughed. He's an unknown upstart. It's just throwing money down the drain. Lak Jin listened to all the arguments, but he still wasn't sure who to bet on. Lin Feng was already thinking about hunting when he remembered that he had forgotten to warn the participants. Under no circumstances should they approach the central area of the dark forest. All the commotion had distracted him a little, and the new players had confused him, so he hadn't had time to give them a warning. However, it was unlikely that the players would get there. The hunt was announced and the participants entered the hunting zone. Once inside the hunting grounds, the guys split into teams and went in different directions. The players from the local academy, armed with their weapons, slowly made their way deeper into the forest, looking around. The girl mage with a wand in her hands was clearly frightened. She had never fought S-rank monsters before. Her team leader told her not to panic and not to give in to her fears. They had already defeated a D-rank boss. The strength of an ordinary S-rank monster was roughly equal to that of a D-rank boss. They just needed to work as a team, as before, and everything would work out. They had to show those village bumpkins what the real elite was made of. The team, led by Bai Yi, calmly advanced deeper into the territory, attentive, focused, but not afraid and fully armed. Suddenly, the young man felt a strange effect, as if some kind of waves were stopping him. He didn't understand what was happening, but his heart was beating like crazy, which usually happens when adrenaline rises. Hanya noticed that something was wrong with her friend, but Bai Yi reassured her. Everything's fine. He tried to smile and said that he just felt a little unwell, but that he was fine now. At that moment, the deputy turned to the guys. Since we're all here together, why not join forces? He added that since Bai Yi had declined the invitation to join their team, the team leader had been feeling restless. Now the young man himself wanted them to start cooperating with him because he was worried about Han Yue and was willing to do anything to make her feel better. It became clear that Bai Yi was very devoted to his commander. He asked again, "Do you agree to join forces and work together?" A huge, monstrous, dragon-like creature realized that today he would get something tasty. It flicked its long, poisonous tongue at one of the players, who managed to defend himself with his shield. It was very dangerous. The players immediately stopped, struck by the size and strength of the monster. Before the school children stood Carlowin, a nuclear mage, very strong and powerful. The leader suggested that they chase after him. It was an ice tyrannosaurus of the S rank, which came out of the bushes and appeared before the school children in all its glory. The kids began to attack it, trying to inflict cuts and add poison. The cuts were very successful. The ice tyrannosaurus howled in pain and bled to death. The girl mage immediately activated her abilities. She recovered from the initial shock and was ready to fight. The mage used a frost mirror that froze enemies. She shouted to her companions that this state could keep the monster at bay for a while longer. Meanwhile, her teammates took advantage of the situation and immediately rushed to attack the immobilized creature. Powerful poison arrows with a poison attribute were used, as well as a blade that released a flying blade. One of the players volunteered to finish the job, unleashing fiery energy at the frozen creature. The ice tyrannosaurus began to thaw just as the flames exploded near its snout. The shock wave, which had accumulated energy, threw the projectile in all directions, scattering the monster's fragments across the field. The school children realized that they had succeeded, despite their fear and tension. They killed Carlovin and received the tail and bone of the ice dragon as trophies, as well as earning points for their account. With this battle, the players confirmed that they were truly elite. They had defeated a wild S-Class monster. The leader of the elite team told his comrades to help him with everything first, and only then to run their mouths. But the female mage looked alarmed. She looked at the ranking table and was clearly unhappy with what she saw. All 3 top spots currently belonged to the team of visiting school children. The 3 of them had already killed more than a dozen monsters. The local school children did not understand how this was possible, since they had just barely managed to defeat one monster together. The spectators from the divine families were dissatisfied. The much-praised elite education was not producing the expected results. The guys who had bet $1 million were now losing. Killing a monster was not easy, and the brothers were tearing their hair out in anger. They looked enviously at Shindibis, who had been lucky so far. The man had bet on Bai Yi. Perhaps he knew and sensed something. The commoner had indeed suddenly broken into the top 3. Definitely, one should never underestimate the power of ordinary people. That's what Xing's father had been telling him since childhood. Lac Jin was also pleased. The guy hadn't even had to place a bet yet, and everything that was happening seemed too easy. If things continued like this, the hunt would cease to be interesting. Shindibis asked what the guy suggested to make it more interesting for everyone. Lac Jin said that he also wanted to sign up and bet on himself. But on the other hand, he couldn't risk his divine power and blood like that, so he would send his servant instead. The servant was also awakened, and the rules only allowed awakened beings of rank to participate. Lac Jin believed that mystery was the most important thing and wanted no one to even guess the truth. He ordered the monsters that had been kept in reserve to be released. If his representative did not take first place, it would be better for him to die in this forest. At that time, a galactic hippopotamus was fighting in one of the fields. The hunters did not understand where so many high-level monsters had come from. One of the hunters tried to call for help when the galactic hippopotamus almost crushed him with his powerful paw. The player begged to be saved and pulled out as soon as possible. But a moment later, a notification appeared. A player named Louis had been eliminated. The guys watching the hunt noticed with alarm that the awakened ones began to disappear from the screens one by one. They were strong, but they couldn't withstand this hunt. The representatives of the divine families, on the contrary, were excited and happy. It was clear that they were enjoying the spectacle. The Oda twins rejoiced like children. Only when there is resistance does it become fun. One of the twins asked to release more monsters if there were any left in reserve. Shindibis watched the hunt on monitors. He was interested, but he did not feel the bloodthirsty excitement that the others felt. Soon, an S-rank star monster called the Stone Monkey was released for the hunt. It was extremely strong, and Hanyo fought it, noting that even with a broken leg, the enemy was dangerous. Hanyo found herself in a difficult situation, but suddenly felt help coming. At that moment, Bai Yi attacked the Stone Monkey with his foot, dealing significant damage. The monster couldn't withstand the blows and was attacked by 3 players. After a while, the Stone Monkey was under the effect of pressure and was suppressed by the power of the Star Mage. Yin Jixin was delighted that his magic had finally worked. The gravitational pressure skill struck a single target and brought powerful pressure down upon it. Taking advantage of this, Bai Yi rushed into the attack with his sword in his hands. As a result, the Stone Monkey was successfully destroyed. The team received meteorites and a large number of experience points. Han Yu noted that Bai Yi had saved her for the 3rd time, even though it was a team effort. In fact, he was the one who controlled the battle. Moreover, the young man had only used the warrior class so far. Bai Yi checked his stats. He had gained a lot of experience, and in a short time, his warrior class had risen 2 levels. The young man understood that he couldn't just unlock the other classes. Although on this battlefield, he could greatly increase his experience in all his incarnations. Bai looked longingly into the depths of the forest, hoping that there would be no cameras hanging there. He wanted to practice his other professions. The young man decided to find a way to be alone and headed into the unfamiliar dark forest for a while. The ranking table looked impressive. The first 3 places belonged to guest hunters. The guys were happy with their results, rejoicing that teamwork had brought such success. It seemed that first place would go to one of them, but 4th place was clearly lagging behind. Hanyo noticed the performance of one of the players who was not even in the top 5 yet. This guy was rapidly gaining points and quickly climbing up the rankings. Bai Yi looked at the young man's photo and guessed that it was Gannis. The giant monster, a level 29 elephant, was successfully defeated. The blessed Gannis was a B-rank cloud warrior. He found it easy to destroy S-rank monsters. Within a few minutes, the young man moved up to 3rd place, and Luo Jin was delighted that his protege was rising to the top. The young man was confident that this time he would take 1st place, because Bai Yi was just a village bumpkin. As Zode considered this unfair, the guy was allegedly trying to cheat by putting someone else in his place. His brother noted that they had never lost a bet before, so they were upset. Jindibis watched what was happening with restraint, showing no emotion, completely focused. The man suggested that the representatives of the divine families raise their bets. They could bet on anyone. Shindibis himself was going to bet another 100 million on his protege Bai Yi. The Oda twins thought the man had really lost his mind. Such huge sums. Lak Jin said that Gannis was his most loyal dog, and if he wanted to part with his money so quickly, he had no objection. They decided to add motivation for the players to speed up the outcome of the tournament. Shindibis ordered to add excitement to the game, and everyone immediately understood what he meant. The participants were informed over the loudspeaker that the final of the hunting tournament was now open. The organizers decided to release even more ferocious monsters. The players had to decide, stay in the arena and continue hunting or leave. A female mage from the elite team announced that she was leaving the arena. In addition, the Tebas family added a special prize to the fun. Whoever took 1st place would receive a valuable reward. It was an item called the Holy Kiss. Bai Yi knew that the Holy Kiss was a ring that a representative of the race of gods could give only once in a lifetime. For an ordinary person, this ring was equivalent to a gold medal of immortality. Even for a mortal sin, the owner of the ring could receive a pardon. In a previous life, the teacher had used exactly the same ring to get Bai Yi out of the prison of the awakened for killing his father. Bai Yi did not expect the Tebas family to be so generous. The competition became even fiercer, and Bai Yi had almost no time left to level up his skills. Yenin noted that teamwork was reliable, but the points were coming in too slowly, and there were fewer monsters around, so he suggested that everyone fight on their own. In addition, a mysterious newcomer had already appeared on the field. This arrangement suited Bai Yi perfectly, but he asked Han Yue if she could handle it on her own. The girl realized she was right. Bai Yi had joined the team just to back them up. She smiled and replied that they shouldn't underestimate the best team in the school, and they would see who would take 1st place. After that, all the players rushed to attack and destroy the monsters one by one. Gannis fought like a machine, completely emotionless, completely obeying his master. It was no coincidence that Lak Jin threatened, if the guy doesn't take 1st place, he will die. The divine lodges watched the hunt, but Lak was the most delighted of all. After all, it was his dog who was the real predator, while Bai Yi looked like a cheap imitation. It seemed that Shindibis would lose a huge amount of money today. At that moment, Bai Yi was walking alone in the forest. From the outside, it seemed that even his comrades had abandoned him because he looked like a complete nobody. At that moment, the young man looked directly into the camera that was filming him. There was something strange on his face. None of the observers noticed anything unusual, but at that moment, the broadcast was interrupted, and the camera showing Bai Yi stopped working. Shindibis understood. It was at that moment that Bai Yi decided to show his true power.